Hello, it's 18th of March 2017 and this is episode 21 of Scavenger's Hoard, a Star Wars podcast. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Kirsty.
We're here to deliver a regular rundown of Star Wars news, analysis and commentary, with a focus on the sequel trilogy and the future of the saga. So this week it's going to be relatively quiet because, for a start, we don't have Natasha and Shai with us for the whole show. Sad times. They are here for the spotlight though, which is like what was left of the discussion we had last week. So you have that to enjoy later on. And it's pretty badass, if I don't mind saying so myself. And yeah, like besides that, it's actually been quite a quiet week, hasn't it, Kirsty, in terms of news and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we have a few little tidbits here and there, but it's been mostly quiet. I'm guessing because we have the lead up to Celebration happening now, so they're going to want to save all the big stuff for then.
Exactly. Like, it's not much longer, guys. It's less than a month now. We can do this. We can do this together.
Yeah. There's a pretty exciting episode of Rebels on tonight, which I'll definitely be watching and avoiding Twitter so that I don't get spoiled. But yeah, we'll have to talk about that next week. So.
Yeah, like I've actually already seen spoilers for that. Don't worry, I won't say anything.
Okay, good.
But yeah, it certainly sounds very exciting. So there's going to be lots to enjoy there, which is good. Yeah, and basically what we decided to do this time, because like it is so quiet in terms of news, we decided to use it as an opportunity to get us around to as many people's questions as possible. So you're going to notice there's like a nice long question time this episode. And yeah, so if you would like to send any questions to us for the next episode of the podcast, you can send them to scavengershoard@gmail.com. And yeah, besides that business, like, is there anything that's happened this week that you'd like to bring up or mention, Kirsty?
Just before we started recording, we were talking about this article in, was it The Express?
Yes.
That's, you know, it's one of those usual Star Wars articles you see where people are like, oh, wow, look at this, you know, this theory that some YouTuber is talking about. What do you think of that? But it's from Mike Zero's YouTube channel, who I think we've talked about before. And he basically brings up the possibility of a romance between Rey and Kylo Ren, which is fine. But the article reporting on it, like, they position it as this like brand new theory that Mike Zero came up with himself, which, you know, he's obviously very high profile, but it wouldn't have taken much just to kind of reference the content and theories that he's basing his own stuff on, because we know that he didn't come up with a lot of the observations himself. Like we had Shai and Natasha on the show last week talking about the essays that they wrote over a year ago now, that discuss these kind of tropes and things that are only really being brought up in the wider fandom now. So it's hard not to interpret some angles as kind of sexist, because Reylo shippers have been kind of experiencing this form of gaslighting, for lack of a better term, in the fandom at large, kind of just being told that we're crazy and imagining things for a long time, when actually we're just pointing out things that are in the story that it's possible we're misinterpreting, but they're there and it's worth having that discussion. But, you know, it's been a controversial topic and it's been banned on certain corners of the internet. Like I was personally banned from a forum just for trying to talk about it. Not in an obnoxious way or anything. I was just trying to point out stuff that was actually in the story and trying to find people who wanted to talk about it. So it's a little frustrating.
Yeah, no, that was the main word I was thinking of. This is all just super frustrating, because it's like the theories and the ideas is like they have no value because they come from women and they're posted on sites like Tumblr, which like immediately means apparently that they don't have any value or no stock is to be placed in them because they're posted on this particular platform. Whereas for reasons that are completely mysterious to me, if a very popular YouTube channel posts it, then suddenly that's legitimate and that's worth talking about and publicising and promoting. And yeah, it just baffles me, because the vast majority of these YouTube videos, they're just clickbait videos. And I don't think that's being unfair to these sites or Mike Zero in particular, because I think Mike Zero, he's covered virtually every Star Wars theory conceivable. He's covered Rey Solo, he's covered Rey Skywalker, he's covered Reylo, he's covered Rey Palpatine, he's covered Rey Kenobi. Like, it's not all these theories, they cannot all coexist. So it's almost like he's throwing darts at every single board possible, because at least one of them is likely to stick at some point. So then he'll be able to dig through his archive once the truth comes out and say, look, I got it right. But he'll only have got it right because it was one guess of many, many, many guesses.
Yeah. I think that just generally, like, we've talked about this before, but there's this weird distinction in fandom, and I can't help but see it as sexist, between shippers and people who are speculating seriously on a potential romance.
Yeah.
And, you know, I can't speak for you, but I personally ended up seeking out the Reylo fandom because I wasn't aware of fandoms and ships and all of this stuff before, you know, going online to try and talk to people about The Force Awakens. But the way that the fandom generally reacted to it, it's like, okay, well, we became like this niche out of necessity.
Yeah.
But we were talking about stuff that's actually in the film, and I know that there do exist, like, crack ships are a thing, and there's lots of stuff in the Reylo fandom that's obviously just like headcanons and fluff and fanfic, and people acknowledge that that's what it is and just have fun with it. But it's just like this weird, like, shunning of the potential theory as a whole.
Yeah.
Just saying that, like, there's nothing of value there unless a man comes along and says that there is.
Yeah, no, it is really, really gross. It's like these theories are basically delegitimized because they are associated with things like fanfiction and stuff. Like, to tie anything to fanfiction is almost like the ultimate insult. Like, because then it calls to mind things like, I don't know, like Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey and stuff like that, you know? They're, like, often derided as, like, bad fanfiction. And, like, my personal feelings on those things aside, there is, like, a stink of sexism associated with those criticisms. Like, it's so heavily biased against the fact that these things are, like, female wish fulfillment and, like, female sexual fantasies. And, like, I personally don't particularly like those works, but I really do think, like, the dialogue surrounding them is really gross because of how heavily gendered it is. Like, and I can't help but think, if a man had written this, I don't think the vitriol would be anywhere near as strong.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, I just think what we see happening with how, like, the Reylo theory is discussed and reported on in the wider media is just part of that, like, overall picture of how things are reported on, and, like, the difference it makes in terms of whether these things are coming from, like, a female mouthpiece or a male mouthpiece. Because, like, for what I can only guess to reasons associated with deeply entrenched sexism, something coming from a man's mouth automatically means it has much more value and weight than coming from a woman's mouth. And it's sad.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I don't want to be like, well, we thought of it first, so you're not welcome.
Yeah, sure.
That's not what it's about. It's just, like, acknowledging that these theories did already exist. It wasn't just, like, not a thing until a man thought of it. It's also kind of naive to be like, it's just to not even consider the fact that people would have picked up on this thing between a heroine and villain. You know, like, obviously that would have existed. We're more than a year out from The Force Awakens, so there's just no way, if this person had done a bit of preliminary research, they would have found it very easily. But yeah, like, this, the way in general, like, that fan fiction is thought of in media, because Shai was talking about last week the article from The Atlantic that came out, like, just maybe a couple months after The Force Awakens was released. It was very much about Reylo as fan fiction. Yeah,
it was called 50 Shades of Rey, wasn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, like, so fan fiction as an idea in fandom and the wider media is very much gendered. Like, it's something that female fans do, which is not actually true. Lots of male fans write fan fiction.
Yes.
But men tend to be more associated with things like cosplay and fan-made films. And those seem to be taken more seriously for some reason, and it's like, it has to be a gendered sexist thing.
Yeah, it's like if you look on the Star Wars Reddit, like, the most popular things on there, they're, like, pictures of, like, people in cosplay, and they're links to trailers for, like, slick looking fan films. You would never find, like, a Reylo fanfiction on the Star Wars subreddit with, like, hundreds of upvotes. That is just inconceivable, because that expression of fandom is considered so lesser than like the other expressions of fandom. And yeah, like it's interesting to me. Like there's going to be lots of complicated reasons feeding into this like tiering of like what's valuable and what's worthwhile and what's not. But yeah, it's just very frustrating.
Yeah, but I say overall, it's cool to see people opening up to the idea that Rey and Kylo could have a romance, or at least something that's a bit more interesting than basic hero and villain.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just the way it's kind of put out there.
Yeah.
It has to be done a bit more respectfully to people who've been here and then experienced that kind of negativity for a long time now. Like, you can't help but feel a little bitter about it, even though you know it shouldn't matter.
Yeah. No, totally. And I think it really, all of this is just strongly symptomatic of how there are absolutely no standards, like journalistic standards, when it comes to how this stuff is reported on. So it is purely done to attract clicks to the websites in question. Because I think The Week, every single week, The Week, puts out a new article reporting on Reddit user XXX says this theory that Rey's mother is going to turn out to be a giraffe. This other Reddit user commented that, and like, there's no proper journalism in that. There's no research. It's just copying other people's words to get clicks. And yeah, it's just sad. It's like, if you're going to report on these things at all, you should at least try and do a better job on it. But that won't happen.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, such is life. Sorry guys, that was a bit of a depressing start to the episode. But yeah, like, I think it's useful to get these things off our chests sometimes and just have these discussions, because that's what the podcast is about as much as anything. Like, just letting us be candid and like talk about these things. Yeah.
I know that I've listened to other podcasts before where they've gone on kind of a rant, sometimes about Mike Zero specifically, but sometimes about like the idea of their theories being stolen and not being credited for things and for their content as well. So
yeah,
it's fair.
It's definitely not exclusive to us. Right, with that said, obviously if you like the show, please do rate and review us on iTunes, because that helps us out massively. And as I mentioned before, if you have any questions at all, please do email them to scavengershoard@gmail.com. And you can find us on Facebook and on Twitter. So if you want to go and signal your approval there, run wild, my friends. Right, then to move on to the news. The first story is that Frank Oz has basically confirmed that he's going to be in The Last Jedi without actually saying he's in The Last Jedi. So yeah, he was speaking to Variety and Event about Jim Henson and his work. And so he was asked, "There are reports that you might reprise Yoda in the new Star Wars." Frank Oz: "I feel like I'm a prisoner at war here, and I can only give you my name, rank, and serial number. To be true to the people who asked me, and they are kind of my family, I have to say I've been asked not to talk about it. I love Yoda. I would be happy to talk to you about it at the time they let me." Bless him. That's like one of the sweetest answers to that kind of question I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's actually quite adorable. It's basically saying, yes, I am. I've been told not to say I am, so please go away. I can't.
Oh yeah, because we've had other, like, in, you know, when people were all wondering about whether Palpatine was going to be in Rogue One, Ian McDiarmid was asked, and he just said no, flat out.
Yeah.
So, you know, if there's nothing to hide, then they can just say no.
He would not be answering like that.
Yeah, so this is basically a yes, but I do feel bad for him because it seems like he was caught a bit off guard, even though he probably should have anticipated it. I mean, the older generation of actors, they were not used to this level of secrecy because the original trilogy wasn't anything like that, was it? So
no, it wasn't. I think you had like David Prowse talking to the local newspaper and saying, "Oh yeah, Luke's dad is Darth Vader."
Yeah, what's the big deal?
Yeah, like now he truly would be shot by Lucasfilm security. Yeah, so I know we've heard rumours about this a long time ago about Yoda coming back. I think from making Star Wars, but like, is it a prospect that excites you, Kirsty?
It does, because I feel like he could play an important part in terms of the story between Rey and Luke, and like getting Luke back into the fight, or kind of contributing to whatever that plot building up in the background has been as to why Luke has, you know, left Leia and gone off searching for something. So hopefully he'll bring something of value, and it wouldn't just be like a form of fan service.
No, totally. That's kind of what I'm hoping for. I don't want it to be treated like the Millennium Falcon moment in The Force Awakens.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was cool and fine, and I understand why they had to do that for The Force Awakens. But that's, like, so cheap. It's like putting a picture of, like, your childhood dog, your beloved childhood dog, like, in the middle of the frame, because you know that will automatically encourage everyone in the audience to go, "Aww." Like, do you know what I mean? It's emotionally manipulative.
It's very self-aware, isn't it? Like, when you... It kind of takes you out of the moment, and it does for me anyway. This like, oh, they're referencing the Millennium Falcon like that because it's a big deal for the audience, or the older audience who's familiar with the original trilogy. But like the new films, and I'm sure that they will get to this place eventually. They do have to stop being so self-aware with the references.
Yeah,
they can't rely on that nostalgia too much. So.
Yeah, no, exactly. So like you, I'm happy to see Yoda back. But I do think it's important that he's used to progress the story, rather than just be there as like a nostalgia button to press. Like, and I trust that Ryan won't be doing that. And like, I think if any of the characters are to come back as Force ghosts, I think Yoda definitely makes the most sense, because he was one of the oldest Jedi, and if anyone is going to be a good source of wisdom, he is. Like, Obi-Wan's also good. Like, but he had a much, much smaller lifespan. So, yeah, like, he's probably going to have less in the way of sage advice to offer. So, if you think back to the original trilogy, some of the advice that Obi-Wan gave Luke was actually deeply flawed.
Yes.
And Luke actually won in the end by completely ignoring Obi-Wan and doing what he didn't want him to do. So Obi-Wan probably felt a bit silly after all that. Have you got anything else to say on Yoda?
Not really. I mean, maybe we'll see him in a trailer coming soon. Who knows?
Yeah. I reckon they might do it where, like, you hear, like, a line from Yoda at the end of the trailer. Like, to tease it without actually showing him.
Yeah.
Because it's the kind of thing I'm not sure they're going to keep it completely secret until the film comes out. That would almost be like keeping the fact that the Millennium Falcon was in The Force Awakens secret until the film came out, which obviously didn't happen.
I do wonder if we see Yoda, that possibly indicates that there'll be less of Maz, because she was kind of filling that gap in the story in The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how she was received by the general audience. I'm assuming well, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think Lupita has hinted that her part in this one is quite small.
Yeah, she has. So I don't think she even did her filming until after principal photography had wrapped.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Like, I'm pretty sure I remember that.
Okay.
So I think Lupita was asked about it at some event or something. She said, I haven't actually shot anything yet.
Okay.
Which confused me at the time, because very early during the filming of The Last Jedi, Ryan, I think on Tumblr, he put up a photo, like, showing what looked to be a mo-capped Mars, like, projected on a screen. Indicating that they were filming something with her quite early, but it's perfectly possible they just used the stand-in.
Yeah, that's probably what happened, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the most logical thing. Lupita's turned into a big star, so it's probably not too far up her priorities to film for like a 30-second role. Right. Then to move on, we have a few tidbits from the Last Jedi trailer.
Spoiler.
Yeah, spoilery, but again, like, I'd say really low level. It's stuff, obviously by the nature of the report, it's stuff that you'd only consider it a spoiler if you don't want to know what happens in the trailers, for example, because this is meant to be short descriptions from the trailers. So basically, if you don't plan on watching any trailers for Star Wars, or at least if you don't want to hear about them in advance, skip ahead, please.
Yeah, I guess that's what I mean. Like, it's not just about, oh, it's going to be in a trailer. It's like, if you want to experience the trailer yourself, like, first time. So I'm conscious of the fact that we have been historically really bad at this kind of thing.
Yes.
Sorry to anyone we've spoiled.
So sorry. Oh, goodness. Right, yeah, so this is from Star Wars Newsnet, and it says these shots will be in the Last Jedi trailer. It says there'll be a shot of a large city of some sort. Also, there will be what looks like an important procession and a feast. There is a ship which looks to be a new design or an X-wing of sorts, appearing above a blue planet at high speed. When we asked for further clarification, the source said that the first two shots appeared to be a funeral of some type and an important dinner. Not sure if he got that right. The extras involved were all dressed in black, and the city had an old look, not futuristic. And the shot of the ship looked to be an X-Wing model, which zooms on the screen at an alarming rate. So yeah, did this add to your hype or get you excited at all, Kirsty?
Not really.
No, it didn't me either. It's like the vaguest of the vague, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably because these are all things that we're vaguely familiar with already.
Yes.
So I'm guessing the large cities, like the Dubrovnik set.
Yeah.
We've heard rumours about that procession and the fact that, like, all of those extras were dressed in quite formal, fancy clothing. I know, like, there have been rumours, and I'm not sure about them, but this idea that there could be a funeral for Han Solo. I was talking to you about it the other day, and we both agreed that it's probably more likely that it would be like a memorial for Hosnian Prime.
Yes.
So that's totally possible.
Yeah. It seems very, like, almost royalist to just have a procession for one person when billions of people have died.
Exactly. And especially for it being Han Solo as well, which I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing that he was still quite a divisive figure, even though he was like a general in the rebellion. He's also a smuggler, so he has that kind of dichotomy going on.
Yeah.
Lots of people wanted his head, so.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like he was a straightforwardly beloved person.
Yeah. And then a ship. Woohoo.
I love my ships, I do. To be fair, not that kind of ship so much.
Yeah, but lots of fans do, so maybe that's fine. Exciting for them. Like, because it says, like, it might be a new design.
Yeah.
That's cool for people who are into that stuff, so.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm sure it'll be featured in the cross-sections of The Last Jedi. Which will be an actual book. I actually have the cross-sections of The Force Awakens, which I brought mainly because I wanted to see what the interior of Kylo's ship looked like.
That's fair.
Research. It's very valid. Yeah, like, I feel like I've really little to say on this. Gosh, this week has been so slow. And just reading this back reminds me of how slow.
It's the calm before the storm.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, I think I'm going to be elated, but also really stressed out. Because right now I almost feel like quite lethargic in terms of the state of Star Wars news, because there is no Star Wars news. And yeah, like, all this stuff sounds fine. Like, I like the prospect of actually seeing an urban centre.
Yeah, it's kind of got that prequels vibe as well, which obviously was missing from The Force Awakens. So
exactly, yeah. Like, Force Awakens, it was much more about having the environments you'd expect from, like, a space fantasy movie. So, like, a castle, like a desert wasteland, like a big bad base where all the baddies live, and that kind of thing. And just seeing something like a bit more ordinary with actual general people living there, that's quite appealing to me. So yeah, I hope we see that and just get a better sense of, like, the ecosystem in this world.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm assuming that would play into that To Catch a Thief subplot with Finn and Kelly Marie Tran.
Yeah, definitely. So, I'd like to see them pull off a heist of some description.
Yeah, it seems like that would be a major setting in the film. So
yeah. No, they put a lot of work into the Dubrovnik filming when they did that, like, last year. So I think we're going to see that reap dividends, which would be cool.
Mm-hmm.
And this brings us to our last piece of news, which is from Gareth Edwards, and he's explaining why we won't be getting any Rogue One deleted scenes. And this is from an interview with Edwards from Fandango. So he goes, "There's not an individual scene that you can drag and drop and put on a Blu-ray," he said. "There are little things that would come and go during the process of post-production, but they're not scenes. They're more moments within the scenes, or a single shot. So it's impossible to be able to do that, and that's why the decision was made. The stuff people talk about, like what they saw in the trailer, they're not scenes you can just put on a DVD. They're moments within scenes and threads. And you pull out a thread, and it all changes. It was changing the whole time. It's not like there was one version, and then there was this other version. It was like this thing that incrementally evolved constantly through all of post-production, and didn't stop until there was a gun at our heads, and we were forced to release the movie." Kirsty, what did you make of Gareth's comments?
I thought he probably should have just stopped talking towards the end there. That is some unfortunate but hilarious phrasing.
Yeah. It's like, oh, Gareth, baby.
a gun to your head, like forced to release the movie. I don't know.
Oh, I feel so mean about Rogue One, but they make it so easy.
Yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense him walking us through why there aren't the deleted scenes, because that is how the filmmaking process works, right? Like there would be all these different elements and moving parts, and then it's not like with the Force Awakens deleted scenes where they have this narrative and then there's just chunks of it they chose to take out. They were actually evolving the story as they were going along.
Yes.
So it makes sense. It's just interesting that they even need to address it. I guess they were just asked and he was trying to answer it on the fly. But
yeah, no, exactly. It really is such an awkward thing for Gareth Edwards to talk about, because obviously no one's been transparent on the reshoots, even though they clearly happened and they were very extensive. And I think this is probably the closest I've seen like Edwards come to basically admitting, yeah, like the fundamental plot of the film changed. Yeah, so it's not really news as such, but it's interesting to see that coming from him, because it was quite a clear picture from everything else we knew, like from the trailers and from the comments of others and from other people's reports. But yeah, I like to see Gareth talking about it. It's very interesting. And I bet those like final months in getting the movie ready, there must have been some very stressful times.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Like, it sounds as if they were working right up until the end point and still changing things that ended up being quite significant. Because I still see people expressing disappointment that things in the trailers didn't make it into the final film, like that TIE fighter with Jyn.
Yeah.
You know, people are still hoping that eventually we see that. But as he's explaining, that scene probably doesn't exist as a finished product, because it was one element of the scene that we did end up seeing that once they took out, they had to replace with other things. And so I don't know if like 20 years down the line, we'd get these things from the archives, you know, but they would then have to do other work to them to have it even make sense.
Yeah, I think the only way they could release these like deleted scenes would literally just be to do a different cut of the movie.
Yeah.
Like, because obviously Gareth Edwards had a cut that was closer to the original concept for the film, and that was shown to people and they were concerned by what they saw, and then that's what led to these massive reshoots happening. But yeah, like the original concept of the movie still exists somewhere, and then I'm sure there were several iterations of the film between like that early cut that triggered the reshoots and then the final product. Because I'm sure, like Gareth indicates, they were playing around with what this film was actually going to be, like in those final months.
Mm-hmm. I still think it's so interesting that the Vader stuff was added in pretty late, like after Celebration, you know?
Yeah. Like, it indicates to me perhaps they had like a lack of faith in the ability of the film to really leave the right impact if like it didn't end on that note, like tying it back into the original trilogy, reminding you about that nostalgia factor.
Yeah, and I think that's valid, because that's what a lot of people came away talking about.
Yeah.
You know?
And in a way I think it's quite sad, because I do think that ending with Jyn and Cassian like just embracing on the beach as like the light takes over everything, as the planet's like severely compromised, shall we say. So I don't think the planet's destroyed, I think it's just suffers a big dent. Like, I think that's powerful, like in its own right. And I do kind of think it undermines that by just going from them, and it's like, okay, well, they're dead now, let's go and see Darth Vader kicking ass. Like, it's super cool, and I love that scene, but yeah.
Yeah, I remember first watching the film, and when you see Jyn and Cassian on the beach, and like the mushroom clouds coming towards them, I thought that was the ending, and then it cuts away, and you have that kind of somber music, as you then see Vader on the ship, ready to board the other one. I was like, oh, it's not. It was like a second ending. It almost reminded me of, you know, at the end of Return of the King, where they're like all those different fade-ins, fades out.
Yes.
It's like, oh, that's not the ending. Oh, that's not the ending. It's still going.
It's like, make up your mind.
Yeah. I like the Vader scene, obviously, and I know that lots of other people do. It's interesting how that was kind of just tacked on to the end there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Is there anything else we'd like to say about that?
I don't think so.
Okay, cool. Right, then what you are going to hear next is the second half of the discussion between ourselves and Shai and Natasha. So yeah, we basically talk about Reylo in the fandom, like, and how it's been received. And then we talk, like, in what I consider quite a fun segment, about what our expectations and hopes are and stuff for, like, Reylo in the films, like how realistic we find it to be as a prospect. So yeah, buckle in and enjoy. Right, so to move on, we are now going to touch upon a different facet of Reylo, which is Reylo, which is Reylo in the wider Star Wars fandom. So, like, if anyone who ships Reylo will know that Reylo is highly controversial for, like, a long list of complicated reasons. And yeah, like, it's just generally treated as something of a pariah in the Star Wars fandom, and people who ship it are genuinely questioned on all kinds of crazy grounds, on the grounds of their morality, on the grounds of their intelligence. Like, and there's just all these, like, outrageous accusations laid against people just on the basis of them seeing this particular dynamic in the movie and running with it to various extents. Like, so they ship it in fandom terms. Yeah, and I just felt that we could probably have an interesting discussion about, like, why that is, and, like, our feelings, like, on this particular aspect of the ship. So yeah, Natasha, did you want to go first?
Sure, absolutely. Kind of wrote about this before, but I came back into the Star Wars fandom for The Force Awakens. And I think that there was a lot of expectation and hope around having that continuation of the series. And I think a lot of it was driven by the fan base that had been around since the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. And the marketing was really well done in the sense that we really weren't given a good window into what the story was going to be or what it was going to represent for those people, especially. So, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of emotional connection investment in there, right? People who make their lives still talking about Star Wars, you know? And so I think there was kind of a subtle expectation that the sequel trilogy would follow the original trilogy and prequel trilogies in the sense of how they were centered and kind of marketed towards a specific subset of the fandom, right? And so when the movie came out and the fans kind of reacted the way they did, you saw a lot of the older, maybe more of the, because it's typically more male fan base, kind of alienated by the movie in itself because it maybe didn't speak to them as much as they had hoped. I think a lot of people were strongly affected by Han's death. They weren't either expecting it or it wasn't clear to them for narrative reasons why it happened. And then on top of that, the story very clearly is a female-centered story. I mean, you have Finn as a deuteragonist, so he has his own hero's journey and arc that runs through the story and will continue to run through the trilogy. But Rey had a very prominent thread, and then was obviously the main conflict. The antagonist is against her. She's a protagonist, and the story is told and towards her perspective and towards women's perspective in general. So when you kind of have the status quo assumption that the hero's journey is going to be the big part of it, and Luke's legacy is going to be the most important thing to the story, and then he ends up just showing up in the last 30 seconds and not saying anything, it's typical that you're going to see people try to create an investure or an idea around his importance still being there, right? I think everything we've seen so far in terms of people's speculation and theorizing has been around how can we make Luke more central to the story? How can we recreate his relationship with Mara Jade in canon? How can we...
More importantly, who did he knock up?
Exactly.
That's the real question.
And, that's a really sad thing, too, because a lot of the times it's not even a concern about whether or not who he knocked up or how he knocked up or whatever. They don't even really care about seeing any kind of build-up or romance or story around that. And we don't have any indication that they're building that story because obviously we would have heard something about casting or writing or whatever, right? But it doesn't really matter. The only thing that's another fridged mother that they can kind of shove to the side, and just so that Rey can be, the legacy for the Skywalkers that can kind of eliminate what they saw as being the wrong, legacy of the Skywalkers, which is obviously Kylo, because he's the epitome of what happens when you have huge amounts of force power and you're raised without any kind of, I guess, that's a lot to deal with just from being born. It's a divine child archetype, right? He's born into great responsibility and he's gonna fuck up.
Yeah.
Anyone would. So and so they, this kind of dialogue that's shown up in sort of like, especially kind of the more established fandom, has been, we need Rey to be a Skywalker so that she can cancel out Leia's a failed bloodline, and when we're kind of arguing, no, he's actually the Skywalker of the story and Rey is not, and Rey has her own story to have and he does too, but like she's already changed his path so completely just by interfering with it, right? She's changed him, and he is obviously going to change because of her, for her, and it's not anything like, she needs a man to save her. It's more like he needed to be saved, and so did Luke, because obviously Luke failed at some point in not being able to protect his academy or keep Ben from falling. So yeah, like if you're really thinking about it from a women-centered standpoint, Rey's story is the most important. It doesn't matter who she's born from. It doesn't matter. It does matter in the sense that she wants to reconnect with her family and she misses them and loves them. But Star Wars is also about the family that we find and make. Mm-hmm. And that, to us, that kind of support Rey being an independent character, and also the possibility of a relationship between Rey and Kylo is I just think that they, instead of seeing that kind of interesting, powerful narrative construct, they're looking at it just purely from, okay, but we can't. The story is about the Skywalkers. We have to make it about the Skywalkers. Everyone's a Skywalker.
That's such a great point. Like there was recently that they Collider Video. They do these crash course videos. They'll take a topic and then they'll explain it in more depth.
Yeah.
And one of the recent ones they did was about Luke, and explaining what he's been up to since Return of the Jedi. And the introduction to that video was basically saying, well, Force Awakens introduced all these great new characters, Rey, Kylo Ren, Finn, Poe, but we all know that the people that we really wanted to see and really care about is Luke and
no yourself.
Yeah, I know, right? I was like, no, actually,
he's an older man.
I think a lot of that plays into, and we know this, studies show this, that women, because of precedent in storytelling for a long, long time, find it easier to identify with male characters through stories, but men find it harder to identify with female characters.
Yes.
So they can look at Rey and recognize, wow, that's a really well-written, strong female character, but how does she relate to Luke?
Yeah.
He's my focus, so how is all this going to serve his journey in The Last Jedi? Because you kept us waiting, and that's what we really want to see.
Yeah.
It's no, this is Rey's story, and Luke will support that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to put it in the simplest terms, obviously Reylo is one of the biggest enemies to that desire to see Rey continue the Skywalker line, because obviously if Rey and Kylo are going to get together romantically, they can't be cousins, because it's not Game of Thrones. It's not Game of Thrones or Flowers in the Attic or any of those
cousins
other,
isn't necessarily bad throughout history in other countries. I'm not going to say I support it, but I'm just saying that it's not that horrible.
I read Flowers of the Attic when I was I was under 11 and had a very formative experience on my life.
Oh no.
Yeah, no, I'm quite open about the fact after I saw Force Awakens, my initial belief was that Rey was Luke's daughter. I just bought the dominant narrative because I could see stuff supporting that in the film. Obviously, I don't think that anymore. But at the time, I remember being really confused because while picking up on the Rey Skywalker stuff, I was also picking up on the squicky sexual subtext. And I was thinking, what are they trying to do?
Yeah.
Is it trying to keep the bloodline pure?
Oh my god.
I was so confused.
The Targaryens, yeah.
For me, I was I had always, in terms of the general public and people picking up on Reylo and stuff, I went into the theater and I walked out thinking there is no way she can be Luke's daughter, because that means that that's a second incest subplot that they are pulling off in how many years, and they need to. I would not take my kids to see this if I had kids, right? So it's like for me, I immediately picked up on that, and I was just like, I mean, we've talked about like the archetypal symbolism, and we've talked about the context within Reylo itself and the fandom too. But you also have to remember the context of Disney and what Disney does, right? Like, Disney is expanding, so they're no longer like Rogue One was actually pretty dark, not as dark as I would have liked it, but it wasn't. Like, so they're expanding. It's no longer just like, the Disney-fied ending, right? It's as a slur, but they still, one of their audiences is still young children. Right? Which is why it's like, I don't think that they would have this blatant sort of, and maybe that's another reason why, like that I talked about, like, taking out the face touching from Kylo Ren, right? Like, I don't think they would put like incest into a story that still needs to be viewed by children, because can you imagine all the angry mothers afterwards, like emailing them? And the same goes for like the coding and Rapido in Raptus, and like what Kylo is doing. Like, you don't want to show that to, like, I hate sounding like a pearl clutcher and saying think of the children, but there's certain things you don't want to show to people under a certain age, just because they might end up like me, so thoroughly corrupted and slightly unhinged. So you have to. So I think, and Disney's got their brand to protect too, right? Yeah. Branding is a big thing for them, and rightly so. So, like, I picked up. I mean, I never thought they were related, and if they do end up being related, like if she ends up being Luke's daughter, you can be guaranteed I'm going to write another meta on all the pieces of incest that they have given us. Just to drive home the point.
And it's so funny that people
fetish going on there. Just so. So I would be writing that. Like, I hope I hope they're not doing that subplot.
I have seen people suggest that they're doing incest again as part of the ring.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it comes up every time, and it's so ridiculous because obviously incest was not a planned thing. It was just a problem with the story not being written while they were making it.
Yeah. Like, coming back to what Natasha said about the divine child archetype, you can see that in the supplementary material that we've had come out since The Force Awakens, like especially with Empire's End. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to read it yet, but there's such an emphasis on Han and Leia having this perfect angel baby boy,
Yeah.
So the mystery is what happened there. Like, that is the backstory here. It's not about how Luke lost Rey and how she's come back into his life. Like, it's the fact that Rey's animus, as we talked about, is this, fallen angel archetype, right? Like, that's Kylo Ren / Ben Solo, and that's going to be the story that is divulged, and that connects with what Luke's been doing over the past 30 years, because he was with him when all of this went down. Like, the tragedy in Luke's past, the tragedy in Han and Leia's past is not that they lost Rey, it's what happened to their child and nephew. So.
And it's so interesting to see people like constantly try to reject that or refute that. Like, some of the people who I see, like, who hate Kylo Ren the most seem to be the people who love Han and Leia the most. And it's really interesting to me to see that kind of tension, because obviously Kylo Ren, he was Ben Solo, and there's all this emphasis on how much they love their child and how they want to do anything for their child. Like, but obviously the people in the audience are coming at it from an extremely different angle from the characters in the text. So, like, whereas parents obviously have unconditional love for their child, people viewing these films, they do not have unconditional love for the person who kills Han Solo.
Yeah.
Right. To them, the fact that he's Han Solo's son, that only makes it worse, because it makes it a more reprehensible crime.
Yeah.
And so then that intense dislike and resentment of Kylo Ren, they make it more urgent that Rey has to be a Skywalker. And they also make the mere prospect of Reylo that much more reprehensible.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think makes sense based on where we come into Kylo's arc, because we don't have the full story yet. But I think people just need to be patient and know that we will be getting that. We've had comments from Adam Driver about how there will be his humanity in episode 8.
Yeah.
And that completely makes sense for the arc that they're trying to tell here through the character, right? because you have the monster. He's called the monster and the creature in a mask by Rey, and then now the mask has come off. She's going to see more of the person, and we will through her interactions with him.
Yeah,
like it's all unfolding in a very clear way if you interpret the story similar to like what we've been saying. Like, is the narrative here between monster and maiden, like those archetypes? That's what makes sense. But people keep trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
That's a polite way of putting it.
So, like, one thing I was wondering in particular was, do we kind of like think that there's anything the films could have done to make Reylo clearer for people, or to take away some of the ambiguity we've seen so much of? Like, would we almost be relieved if like there were less of a debate surrounding this? So, for example, if they'd like called Rey Smith, like, and firmly established that her parents were Jane and John Smith, and that they were like gas miners from Cloud City,
Yeah.
and that they just had like a drunken night out and like left their child behind, but like Rey still hopes they can come back for her because she doesn't want to believe the worst in her parents.
Yeah.
Like, do you kind of like, obviously not with that really lame and stupid backstory,
No, that's great.
but do you kind of wish they'd made things like more precise in like areas like Reylo and areas like Rey's parentage, like to avoid all of the angst and drama we've seen since?
Yeah, I think the mystery box was built very, very tight and weird and wrong, and it definitely made it more difficult for us to have these conversations, right? Because we're literally quoting the book, the script, everything that we can possibly pull to try and validate our reading of it, when there's so much there. You know, we've talked about the fact that they left out the compassion line, which they filmed according to Pablo, and in which Snoke says, "You have compassion for her," and Kylo says, "No," you know. But you know, he's called out on having compassion for her, and people have kind of glossed over that because obviously they're like, if it's not in the film, it's not canon. Although, I think it truly is. There's the in the Force back itself, they had the vision. And Bespin starts out with Rey looking down the hallway and seeing a younger, different version of Snoke standing with a young, presumably Ben Solo. And this would kind of tie in the idea that, you know, maybe, you know, not only is she seeing the vulnerability of this child that was, you know, cursed by the attention that Snoke put on him, but also that, you know, he might have had a vision of her at that time in his life, which would again kind of seal this kind of like connection and intimacy that's there. I have another one that I love, but nobody really talks about. But in the novelization, one of the last things that Leia says to Rey as she's wishing her goodbye, which was completely cut from the film, they really don't have any dialogue between each other when she's leaving for Ohtze, is Leia says, "You won't share the fate of our son," in response to Rey saying, "You're afraid that I'm going to fall to the dark side as well." And I feel like that's intense foreshadowing again for this relationship that is such a huge part of it. But of course, it's been very underplayed within the marketing. It's been underplayed within the general fandom, and I think it makes sense because I think this is the true twist, right? Like how can this progress? How can this become bigger than it is? And I think that it makes sense that they want to keep people from talking about it or assuming it, because I think, yeah, it's going to be that much more interesting and exciting if people don't have any clue what's going to happen, you know?
Yeah. That's a really good like thing to call out, that exchange between Leia and Rey. Now you mention it, actually makes me think that that's actually quite an interesting parallel potentially.
Yeah.
With like, so you obviously have, by the grace of your training, I will not be seduced.
Exactly.
Kylo Ren.
Yeah.
And then we shall see.
We shall see.
And yeah, so you have this like character who's obviously cocky and convinced that they're confident in their respective sides. So Kylo's confident that he's dead set and embedded in the dark side, and we learn that that's a complete lie, and he's clearly not.
Yeah.
He's a complete emotional mess by the end of the film. And like Rey in that exchange with Leia, she's clearly confident. No, I'm not going to fall like your son did. And I think if anything indicates that she actually will fall, or at the very least be sorely tempted, like that parallel does. So
yes. For me, it's like I've already talked about the fact that I'm glad that the dynamic between Kylo Ren and Rey was dialed back a bit, partially because I prefer a little bit of mystery myself, but also because the subtext would have been very different if it hadn't been dialed back. That said, I wish the Rey's parentage had been handled differently, because it's like, and, you know, it's already been expanded upon multiple times and in various different ways. But so there's this mystery box about Rey's parentage, and I feel like this quest to find out, you know, who knocked up who, and who's Rey's parents are, and who's the baby mama, like basically all that sort of stuff, right? Like the question of the question of Rey's parentage is almost superseding the rest of the plot, right? To the point where it's detracting from the story and the enjoyment of the story. And so let's say, for example, Rey's parents, like it turns out to be something really, really pivotal. Like there was a rumor going around months and months ago that she was actually an offspring of Palpatine, right? Like through a consort or something like that, like some sort of theory, right? Like so, if, like let's say, for example, if there was really some sort of hook to her parentage, I can see her being really. I can see being really interesting, but like, what if she turns out to be a nobody? Like, what if there's no mystery? What if it's never answered? You're gonna have so many upset, angry people on both sides who are like, well, what did I spend all this time theorizing about? Like, you know, why all this mystery for nothing, right? Like, why just not come out and say it? I sort of feel like the mystery box was built up wrong, incorrectly, as Nat says, and I sort of feel like this is like a little bit of a you know, proverbial ticking time bomb in terms of the fact that like I think the producer, I think the people, the creative team behind it knows that there's this potential for some huge backlash in relation to Rey's parentage if it's not played out correctly, which is why you see all these leaks and all these like them dropping all this sort of information through proxies, you know, through like Pablo or through JJ or through Daisy herself, right? Like just to kill off some of these theories, because the thing is, there's always going to be outrage, but if it comes all at once, it's going to be a nightmare to deal with.
Yeah.
So I feel that Rey's parentage especially could have been handled differently, and I'm a little bit apprehensive about that and what's going to happen once it actually drops.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if they really if they kind of used the possibility of her being as a Skywalker as like they weren't quite confident enough in what they were doing with this heroine, that they kind of wanted to sell her as a potential Skywalker so that you'll be more attached to her as a character, which is really quite sad because she's amazing on her own. And it might make it so much worse in the end. I don't know.
I definitely think that's a very plausible reason for it, because I'm quite cynical when it comes to things like this. And like I reckon there was a lot of trepidation about how are people going to respond to these new characters? Are they going to like them on their own terms? Or like, are we going to need to use these like original trilogy elements as a crutch? And I really think the response to The Force Awakens has proven to them that no, you can be confident in your new characters. People will love them. Like, and people are invested in their stories now. So I like to think it's going to make them more bolder in the future. And I also think that's probably part of the reason why, say, Pablo has this seemingly free license to constantly shit on like Rey Solo and Rey Skywalker on Twitter. Like, do you know what I mean? Because like, there's clearly got to be some kind of agreement in place. I don't mean like a formal contract saying, Pablo, you can write about this, and this, and this, and this on Twitter. But like, if it were happening, like, I just don't see him even acknowledging it.
Yeah.
Like, or even engaging in that conversation. Yeah, like, he just seems to be full on snark mode. Like, and sometimes it seems like he'll actively seek conversations out to say, oh, lol, no. Do you know what I mean, though? And
yes.
yeah, like, I really do just think that they're being like, no, we need to try and steer people like back on the straight and true path. Like, and obviously all this stuff is directed at hardcore fans. Yeah. Casual fans, they're I do think a lot of casual fans think she's a Skywalker, but they're not going to be in like paroxysms of grief and agony when they
grief and agony.
Yeah, I think most casual fans thought that she was a Skywalker, but not because it was the most exciting option, but because it just made sense to them on a superficial level. Like, oh, well, she's really powerful, so she has to be Luke's kid, and she's looking for a family, and he's right there. But I feel like they would be pleasantly surprised if she wasn't, because it would make the story more exciting to them. They don't want to have figured it all out.
Yeah. I literally have a casual friend, like a casual Star Wars fan friend, like who said that she hopes Rey isn't Luke's daughter because it would be boring. And it's like, yes, it would be, wouldn't it?
Well, because it wraps up all of the tension. It's like, okay, well, we have our good Skywalker now. We don't kill the spare, like Kylo Ren is no longer necessary. And I know, so the argument against Reylo often hinges on the idea that we're trying to make Kylo Ren more important than he is. This is Han and Leia's son. He's important regardless.
Yeah.
Even if she was a Skywalker, the conflict would still be, the conflict of the legacy children. Like, I don't find that compelling, but he would still be Han and Leia's only son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of a straight, like, there's this weird idea that, like, if you have a liking for Kylo Ren as a character, you're somehow kind of trying to warp the narrative to make him more important than he is, but he is important.
He is. Yeah.
Sure.
It's not about condoning his behavior.
No.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Right. Have we said what we want to say on that aspect of things?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool. Right, then we're going to get into the final part of this discussion, and that is going to be on the future of Reylo.
Okay.
Right, okay, so obviously while Reylo is very popular and it's infamous on hardcore fan forums, I think it's still safe to say that Reylo's like a bit of an unknown quantity, like to the general public. Like if you went up to like a grandma in the street, like she might know who Darth Vader is, but she'd go, "What?" If you tried to talk about Reylo to her, she wouldn't know what you meant. And basically one thing I was wondering is, do you think that things like the whole like Instagram thing where Judi Dench asked Daisy, "What's the deal with Reylo?" Do you think those are like conscious attempts to actually enter this into the mainstream dialogue? Because that's the kind of thing that goes viral, so that is not going to be limited to an audience of hardcore Star Wars fans on forums. Like it's going to go out there to just general people who like Star Wars and are interested. And I'm sure to quite a few of the people watching that video, they did not know what Reylo was before they saw it. So yeah, like I was just wondering, do you think that there's like an agenda behind that, or do you think it was just like Daisy having fun?
I think it's a little bit of both. I really do think that she had prerogative in there, and obviously she was the one kind of feeding, and maybe I believe Josh Gad would be a Star Wars fan, so I'm sure that he had a kind of a viewpoint on that stuff. But outside, you don't really see discussion of Reylo outside of kind of the more niche fan circles. So having her bringing it up, not just in this, but also within, the context of the podcast that she was on, and she's liked fan art on it, of it. I feel like she's kind of poised as the person that's kind of, she's going to have to deal with the fallout of it if it happens, right? She's going to have to deal with, because it's just the day and age that we live in. Twitter is, puts the creators and the actors really up close and centered with their fans. And so I think there is some merit to the idea that they might be seeding this so that people are more familiarized and comfortable with the topic, so that when they actually Google it or look it up on Twitter, and if I don't know if you've looked up the Reylo hashtag on Twitter recently, but it's still, it's still pretty awful.
Is it like Mos Eisley? You should never go there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. The hive of scum and villainy. It's mostly just because people are the social media runs on outrage. We know this. They like to be offended or to be upset by something. And if you, on the surface level, see Reylo fan art and you're like, are they really like trying to like force Rey to be with this villainous character that she doesn't like and she hates? Of course your first thought's gonna be like, oh yeah, they're disgusting, because they just don't care about Rey's agency or Rey's, wants or needs, and they're just because they look good together, they want them to, whatever. So, if that's your
PG-13.
Exactly. And it's really not that, especially coming from a like a curative canon fandom kind of viewpoint. It's definitely not that, and we've obviously had a long talk about how it's not that. But on the surface, you do have to deal with those kind of in the middle fans that might not really know Star Wars very well, but kind of got into Star Wars through The Force Awakens, and then kind of are following what's going on in that kind of social media sphere. And as we've seen, it's a very, major news organizations are picking up Star Wars stories all the time, or Star Wars news, like leak stories all the time, because it's such a universal topic. It's such a huge franchise. I mean, it's the biggest in the world. So, having people be aware of kind of the subtle, even though people are calling it crack theories on it, is a good thing. And I think it's nice to see that they're doing that. I just, I think too, when we look at the fact that for publicity for The Force Awakens, and even for sort of like for stuff that's been coming out now, there's like a really weird void of silence on Kylo and Rey, right? Is it just me, or does it seem like a lot of the time that people just completely gloss over that subject entirely?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The professionals? Yeah, I think they do. Like, for an interesting thing I noticed was, so when I first dropped my metas, right, like, so they got a lot of traction, and they were being posted on Reddit constantly, with nasty notes attached. So my stuff was making the rounds, right? And it even made it into the Atlantic eventually, right? And normally when crazy fan theories start popping up, Pablo is always there to literally shoot down the theory in question and tell the person they're an idiot. But there's been like kind of silence on it. And it's not to say that, they're reading this theory in particular or my work in particular, right? It's just this idea of, like, if your theory is crazy, they let you know, right? Like, we saw that with the Rey Solo and some of the Snoke theories.
Jin is Mara Jade.
And so it gets kind of, and if you're dealing with Pablo in particular, it can get really snarky and a little bit nasty too. So I find it very interesting that there is that kind of void of silence, where they're just kind of zipping their lips and not saying much. And it makes me wonder what's up, get out the tinfoil.
Yeah. No, I find the silence is often like more interesting than what's actually said. Mm-hmm. And like, just beyond like any conspiracy, I do find it very interesting how like mainstream reviews, like obviously we've got the famous Phromatic Sonata. Well, I'm sorry for horribly butchering that. So we have that, but like, I think for the most part, most of the reviews don't really touch upon it. Like, they talk about Rey and Kylo as these separate entities, and you could easily read them, I think, the majority of Force Awakens reviews without realizing that these characters even meet, like, a lot of the time, or at least that without realizing that they have interactions other than trying to hit each other with lightsabers. Like, I think people find stuff like the interrogation, the abduction, they find it very curious, but they don't know why, and they don't know what to make of it. So I just sense like a discomfort with it almost. Yeah. Like, there's a great like, sorry to go back to the Collider again, but Collider Movie Talk, they did a commentary for The Force Awakens, and it's not just an audio commentary, it's they actually filmed the guys who were recording the commentary, and these are all very stereotypical, like, white male nerds. Yeah.
I've seen them.
Sorry, like, I don't mean to sound
no, it's okay.
Appropriative, it's not. Like, they're all good guys, like, and I enjoy watching them. But it's very interesting to watch them as they're watching stuff like the abduction and as they're watching the interrogation. And you can see them, like, searching, like, for other things to talk about. Because they're like, I don't understand.
It's like elevator music's playing.
This is the thing, like, so much of the emphasis, even if you are someone who believes that Rey and Kylo Ren are related, the emphasis is then all on Rey and her future relationship with Luke, as opposed to with her antagonist, because no one can get excited about the idea of these cousins battling it out.
No.
Like, because it's just not, that's not a thing. Like, that's not a trope.
Mm-mm.
Like, cousins who didn't grow up together, so weren't really, really close and then grew apart. It's the other way around. We have this idea of like Kylo sensing that their destinies are intertwined. Like, that's the future, that these people came across each other, were complete strangers, but somehow have this connection. And what's that going to mean for the future? That's not family, that's future. Like,
Yeah.
it's the opposite.
Yeah, and in relation to the Judi Dench video, in terms of like if they're trying to introduce the general public to the idea of it, I think they're trying to mitigate damage again, right? Like, I think this part has to do with them with the actual tying in of the, you know, was the mystery box too much of a mystery, right? But I think there was this, like, they're dealing with, there's this thing within writing communities, and I include myself in this, where you start writing and then you write for other writers. And you get really, really meta, and you get with all this like sort of subtext and layers of subtext and archetypes behind it, and other writers pick up on that, but the general audience might not necessarily pick up on it in the same way, and they might react to it negatively before waiting to see the whole story play out. And we've seen this with Reylo, but it's also the general culture of fandom these days too. Like, everyone wants everything up front, and they want it so that it is, you know, as unproblematic or as non-gray area as possible. They want a very, very clean narrative. Like, it's a big trend, and I think that. I think in some ways, like, this is me wildly speculating now. So we've entered that territory, but like I when I look at all these like quote unquote leaks and the Judi Dench video and all this other sort of stuff, I sort of feel like it's them trying to ease people into something, and that they hadn't really planned to ease people into. Like, they hadn't expected to see this sort of reaction to it or this strongly. So they're like, you know, okay, how do we still keep our narrative while, you know, making sure it doesn't hurt the brand or anything else? Like, how can we just like give it in tidbits, you know? So I feel that that influences a lot of what they're doing and a lot of videos that they're doing, and who drops what information.
Yeah, and the fact that they feel they have to do that now does concern me a little, because it almost makes me wonder if J.J. Abrams knew what he was doing when he decided to have Kylo Ren kill Han Solo, because they must. I figured that they must have known what the fandom would think of that.
Yeah.
That you know, for 2 years, people would hate this character and not understand why that happened. Like, because they kind of, even though his regret and his conflict is in the film, it's you can take it or leave it. Like, you don't have to see it if you don't want to, and lots of fans don't.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder, do they have a plan in place to like really lay it on thick that this guy does have humanity and a reason to be the way he is?
I think they absolutely do. So I think with stuff like removing that whole like vision of like little Ben Solo with Snoke and removing the compassion dialogue, I don't think that was removed to be scrapped entirely. I think it was removed because they're going to do those things in The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because if you think about it, like that compassion dialogue, I think it would make much more sense to have Snoke say something along those lines in reprimand to Kylo at the start of The Last Jedi, because then, like, it's very, very clear how severe and great the consequences of Kylo's compassion for Rey have been.
Yeah.
Because obviously the whole Starkiller base went kaput. And I think, like, him picking up on that there, like, that just makes more sense. And then it also creates, like, a really strong foundation for that character and like his journey over the course of the film, because presumably he's going to be punished for feeling this compassion, and then that's going to put him on this negative trajectory in terms of Rey. But like, well, I need to purge her. Like, killing my father wasn't enough, but maybe killing her will be. So I think they might be doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for and imagining. But then you have these kind of almost damage control situations, and it's like, I don't know, I just kind of got this vibe sometimes, like from the commentary, the way JJ was talking about Kylo. It's almost like, well, people have told me that they totally misinterpreted the scene, so I need to set the record straight.
In the commentary that no one's listening to because they didn't buy the second version.
Right.
Yeah. I definitely think that's like a severe problem, because I think by waiting until The Last Jedi to really humanize this character and help us understand him, like, they almost like sucked that out of The Force Awakens, and so for many people viewing The Force Awakens, he is just left as this like cold monster who kills his father. Like obviously we'd probably disagree with that because we think there's lots of complexities and like emotional layers to that character.
Yeah.
But for some people, he is just straightforwardly evil in that movie, and that's why you have misconceptions that like JJ was trying to address. So I do think they're conscious that they might have gone too far, like in holding back these reveals for The Last Jedi, because I really think that's going to be like the twist as such. Like it's going to be like about Kylo's nature.
Yeah.
Like to a great extent. I do think there's also going to be twists and turns concerning Rey and her history. But I think they wanted people to come in with this expectation that Kylo is going to be evil, and to some extent even leave The Force Awakens with that conviction, only to upturn that and really challenge that and explore that in The Last Jedi.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
agree completely.
Right. So I'm probably going to move on to one of the more interesting questions here, which is, what are our personal feelings on the chapter of canon, in air quotes, Reylo going forward, and what form of canon do you realistically expect? Because the thing is, there's different like levels of Reylo or magnitudes of Reylo, however you want to put it. So like, by far at the most optimistic, fanciful end, you probably have Rey and Kylo are married, and they have 3 children.
Oh, God.
Sam, Joe, Bill, and Betty. And they have a lovely little house with a white picket fence and a dog called Spot. And then like that goes down to like weaker forms of Reylo, like until you probably reach. They're still like a bit bitter at each other, and there's still that negative history, but they're like reluctant allies, so they like get along because circumstances force them to. So basically, it's not like saying canon Reylo means like white picket fence scenario, although that'd be hilarious. It would annoy so many people.
Yeah. Episode 9.
Oh my god! Just imagine it in the opening. No. Yeah, so basically, guys, what are our personal feelings on this? This isn't like about making promises as such. It's like, so based on what we saw in the films, and potentially if we do that kind of thing, what we have read about where things might be going in The Last Jedi, what do we think about the future prospects? Who wants to go first?
Nat, you can go first.
Oh, okay. Well, feeding back into what we were talking about a little bit earlier with the humanization of Kylo, which Adam has made really clear. I think that and we do have shows. This is spoiler friendly, right?
Yeah, spoiler warning, guys.
Spoiler wise, we know that we're going to get an extended version of the Force back, at least a bigger perspective on it, especially around what happened at Luke's temple. And right now they've just completely skirted that whole thing and tried to, like they glossed over it. They've never really addressed it fully. Kylo is the Jedi killer, but was it a massacre? Was there other circumstances involved? Because everybody kind of assumes that he's Anakin 2.0 and that he, killed a bunch of younglings, which would be, that's pretty irredeemable. I don't, maybe after, it makes sense at the end of his life and he dies for it, but that's just something that would never fly. So there obviously has to be a twist around that makes it so that he is a sympathetic or empathetic character, not only to the audience, but to Rey. Rey is poised to have the best understanding of that, because if she can access his most intimate thoughts through a Force connection or through, that, then she can see the truth. He doesn't have to try and convince her of that or tell her that, which means that she's poised as the one person that understands what he went through or what happened. And also, whatever happened with Luke during that time as well, getting that view on this mentor figure that I don't think that she's going to, implicitly trust Luke, and there has to be a conflict with Luke at some point. We can't just be all like happy, I'm going to, learn from you and we're going to go off and fight together, and it's going to have to be a lot more interesting relationship. And part of that will be paved with that history of why Ben Solo fell and how the Jedi Academy, or whatever it's called, fell. So yeah, there's a huge thing around that, and I think that once that is tackled within the narrative, it will put them in a position where they can be either allies or in which the audience accepts, like, even if Kylo stays on, the dark side, for example, he'll still, our understanding of him will still make it clear that if he does decide to do something kind of heroic, like, sacrifice himself, and, not like literally, but like metaphorically for Rey, then we will, feel a lot more of that kind of, that poignancy that is needed for that relationship to actually move forward into something, truly epic. So yeah, I don't expect it to be easy, and I don't expect it to be very romantic per se. But I do expect it to have a lot of this kind of the romantic tension of just kind of fighting against all the odds that are against you, to make it happen.
For me, it's like, well, I mean, my essay, like the death in the maiden, how Reylo will be canon, but not in the way you're hoping. Like I put it in the title, and people seem to have conveniently ignored that. And basically, so we already know that I'm a very cautious speculator, or theorist, and I tend to base things solely on what I see in the text. This doesn't mean that my opinion on how Reylo will play out later will remain the same. Like, I'm fully expecting that once we see episode 8, like once I see the Last Jedi, my opinion on this is going to change, right? Like, it's because I'll have new information. It might even change before that, depending on what we get in the trailers. But at the moment, I think, like, I personally believe that I personally think that we already have Reylo. It's just not in the way that people want it to be, or really look at it, because the fact that there's interest there, one-sided interest from Kylo towards Rey, that's already in TFA. That's already there. The subtext is already there, and I think that there is going to be a really interesting dynamic between the two of them, especially in episode 8 and maybe in 9, depending on what happens in 8. And I think it's going to be really complex. Like Nat said, I don't necessarily think it's going to be romantic. And I do think I think there's a lot of evidence to put towards the idea that there's going to be one-sided Reylo, and how that manifests, like how Rey's behavior towards Kylo manifests in 8 remains to be seen, right? Because we have to remember that when TFA left off, like, yes, it goes with, the movie ends with Luke, right? But before that, like, she just tried to kill him, right? Like, there's and with good reason. Like, he had basically kidnapped her, kept her restrained, tortured her first friend. Finn is super important to her, and killed her pseudo father figure. Like, he's done some pretty terrible stuff, and she is not going to feel very charitable towards him. To put it bluntly, like, it's just like, he is definitely interested in her. I think he's very confused about her. I think that there is going to be, especially when you talk about the mysterious connection to the Force, I think that's going to confuse both of them. So I think that he's definitely interested in her, but she's definitely not romantically interested in him right now, and I don't think she is. And I think that they're going to have to do some build up towards there being anything that's even remotely mutual in the way that people want it to. At the same time, I don't think Reylo will be in the same way that detractors think it will be, with her being sublimated to a powerful man, right, and losing her agency. Like, I don't think that's going to happen either. Like, if Rey gets involved with Kylo, whatever that involvement might be, I think it's going to be her choice. Like, I think she's going to. There's this talk we talked briefly about the being tempted by the dark side, and all of us have mentioned it before. And I think that she's going to, like, if she decides to get involved with Kylo, it is going to be her choice. She's going to subvert the trope, right? And that, for me, that's what's really important. Whether it's mutual, whether, it ends with that white picket fence, whatever the narrative is, I want the agency of both Rey and Kylo Ren to be respected, right? Like, I want to make sure that that's central to the plot, because that's a good message to be sending. That is an important message to be sending, especially with the themes of Star Wars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really like sensible and logical position to take on it. I definitely don't like think there's going to be like white picket fence Reylo, but because as we've established, I'm not as cautious as you are. Like, I'm probably more inclined to believe they are going to go towards like a romance, like or at least like make overtures in that direction. Like I think one of the main reasons is like there was an interesting quote from Ryan Johnson when I think he's been interviewed by USA Today or another one of those like magazines. They were doing like a preview of 2017 movies, and Johnson like compared like what Rey goes through in The Last Jedi to adolescence. So like this process of like obviously leaving like the innocence and like happiness of childhood behind and like entering this more like complicated and like adult territory. And while that obviously doesn't necessitate romance or mean romance has to happen, I do think it's interesting that you're going to have this scenario where there's going to be these two central male figures in Rey's part of the story, and they're going to be Luke, who's obviously like the older mentor figure, and then there's going to be Kylo Ren, like who like embodies rebellion, like in so many different ways. Oh god, I almost hate to say this because one of the things that Reylo gets criticized for is for like being like this tweeny like YA fantasy. But like he is like a bad boy, like in many ways, you know, like dark, brooding, handsome, like and like it looks like he's going to throw a spanner in the works. He's going to be this
also apparently a warlord. He is also a warlord with that hair.
A vulnerable warlord. And that's literally from the databank. Oh my god. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not subtle, and like even when you look at things like their freaking Spotify playlists.
Oh yeah.
God. Oh, that playlist. Oh.
It's so much teenage angst and pining, and oh god.
That's a kind way of putting it.
Yeah.
It makes sense though, because I mean, again, the heroine's journey, they're about going from being a child to being an adult, and these people have been stunted like emotionally and like developmentally by the circumstances in their lives. Rey by being stuck on a horrible planet for a decade, and Kylo because of everything that happened around him. So like they're figuring it out, and the people that should be their mentors, you kind of feel like they never really got the chance to really fully realize themselves either. I mean, not to be like, about it.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think, like, obviously it's also very important to remember the relationship between Luke and Kylo Ren and all of this. Because Kylo Ren clearly has a serious beef with Luke. We don't understand what that is or why that is. But, like, obviously Kylo and Rey are going to share this connection. And so I can, like, again, like, leaping several steps forward and extrapolating wildly, so don't take me too seriously. But I can see a scenario where Kylo Ren undermines Rey's faith in Luke.
Yeah.
And then presents his way and, like, Kylo Ren himself, like, as an alternative to that.
I totally
desirable alternative.
Yeah, I think he would. I totally think he would do that. Because it's like, you see the way that he reacts to another interesting thing. We didn't really touch on it too much, is the way that Kylo reacts to the other men in Rey's life.
Yeah.
And he just gets increasingly more aggravated, right? Like he reacts really negatively to Finn. Like there's that whole traitor thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's still confusing. So for me, from multiple different levels. So I'll put that aside for now. But like, he gets even more agitated when he finds out she's getting chummy with his dad, right? Like,
yeah.
So the fact that she's going to now it looks like she's going to be like, like Luke's pupil, right? Like it's like I can just see him like, flipping out completely, right? Yeah. Like here is she going through all the other men and all the men that he's rejected, right?
Going through them. Oh no.
Well, it's sort of like he's already been through it, so he has experience, and he's obviously felt failed by it, So like, yeah.
No, so it's in like a perverse way. Like when he says he would have disappointed you, that's almost like an effort to like insulate her from like that disappointment and like prepare her for it. Like, so in Kylo Ren's mind, like irrespective of the circumstances, he probably thinks he's doing her a favor and giving her sound advice.
Yeah, it's such an
experience.
it's just such like a quote unquote nice guy thing to do, because here he is, he thinks he's doing, like, he thinks she's his guest, she thinks he's doing her favors, he's protecting her, and she's basically like, fuck off. So it's like it's such a privileged little shit thing to do.
And like, I'm like you. I think that absolutely, if romantic Reylo is to happen, like, it can't happen like in circumstances where there's coercion, where Rey's being like deceived or misled in some way. Like, if Kylo Ren makes arguments to her about why Luke did something bad and why she shouldn't trust Luke and why she should trust him instead, they need to be damn good reasons.
Exactly.
There need to be reasons why we could understand why she'd believe him, especially considering the history she's had with Kylo Ren. In like the arguments against Reylo, you get the impression that the people who ship Reylo, they don't give a damn like about how it plays out. All they want in this is just for Rey to swoon into Kylo's muscly, beautiful arms, and be swept away by him, so they can like live in a Sith castle and he can become emperor and like do evil shit.
We take you back to Mustafar.
For Rey's development as a character, like, what is her antagonist going to offer her that her mentors wouldn't or couldn't? Like, you know, he is connected to Luke for a reason. Yeah.
No, totally. And while that stuff is fine for fan fiction and entertaining fan fiction, I don't think any Reylo shippers realistically expect or want anything like that to happen. Like
realistically, no. You'll find out in a second.
Once, that's a different story. Right, just to move things on, what are your thoughts, Kirsty, on this? What's your position?
Oh, in terms of like Reylo in The Last Jedi?
Yeah, like your level of optimism for Reylo's chances in canon and the form of canon that you perceive.
Well, I do think that Reylo plays into the potential larger themes of the sequel trilogy, like the idea of somehow balancing the Force and moving beyond Jedi and Sith. So I see a lot of that talk going on right now in fandom, like in terms of what Kylo and Rey's dynamic could be, but it's still kind of divorced from the notion of romantic Reylo, whereas in the Reylo community, we've been talking about those ideas of balance and Jedi and Sith for a long time, and this connection through the Force that they seem to have. But I don't think it's going to be like a simple romance or explicit confirmation of that in The Last Jedi. Like, I don't think there's going to be a kiss between them or anything. I know that some shippers are expecting to see that.
You don't think Kylo's going to turn up, knock politely on the door of the hut, and like take off his cap and say, Uncle Luke, could I take Rey out for dinner now?
No, I don't really see that.
There's comics that have that, and it's just great to see.
I do think that Kylo, because I do think that Shai is right. Like, one-sided Reylo is canon as far as I'm concerned in like The Force Awakens. I know we've talked about a lot of it being subtext, but I still think it's like Kylo has feelings for her, but he's not quite aware of what that means yet, and Snoke's going to call him out on it, and then he's going to try and double down on, oh, no, she is my enemy and I am a dark sider and I'm a badass, you know, like so I feel like in The Last Jedi we'll see Kylo's feelings become more obvious, like so obvious that the audience will be able to see them, like beyond Reylo shippers. But I think Rey's going to come to sympathize with him and kind of be conflicted about her own experience of light and dark and how that relates to Kylo. But I don't think it's not going to be like explicitly mutual. Like, there's just too much story left to tell there. I think it could be one-sided up until like towards the end of episode 9, when it really comes down to the wire and maybe Kylo sacrifices himself for Rey. But they're gonna
that idea.
I feel like they're gonna steer clear of anything that harkens back too much to Amidala for obvious reasons. Even though they, you know, I know a lot of people say, "Oh, Disney want to pretend the prequels didn't happen." I don't think that's true. They do still market Anakin and Padme's relationship as very much a star-crossed lovers romanticized thing. It's not like, oh, once he became Vader, like that's it. Like, I know a lot of the fandom focuses on the problematic aspects of Anakin and Padme's relationship, and some people do say it's abusive and all that, but that's not how the creators themselves see it. If they're still marketing it as a star-crossed story, you know. So I think there might be elements of that in terms of this mysterious connection through the Force, and it's very like ethereal like romantic with a capital R between Rey and Kylo, but I think it's going to be more nuanced than what we saw in Attack of the Clones.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
No floating
Like,
pairs.
I really want fan art where someone draws some like Rey and Kylo, like Anakin and Padme when they're like frolicking in the field on the boot.
Oh.
Like maybe instead of whatever those like weird ass creatures you have in Attack of the Clones are, you have like Happaballs just to like keep it relevant and current. Right, yay! Look at me, Rey!
I think we might see more of a conventional flirty dynamic between Finn and Kelly Marie Tran's character.
Yeah.
Actually, I was watching Collider Jedi Council the other day, and Christian Harloff just casually referenced Kelly Marie Tran as his love interest, and I was like, wait, was that based on anything, or is that just a headcanon that's like...
I think he reads making Star Wars.
Okay,
I
they've
think
been saying
making
that,
Star Wars or have long been referring to Kelly Marie Tran as Finn's love interest.
Right.
So I think that's where he's picking it up from, more than like insider knowledge. But that is, I might be wrong. That's just my view.
Yeah, that was kind of the impression I got, but like, again, love interest is such a vague term. You don't really know what that means. I know a lot of people were, before Rogue One came out, the idea of Jyn and Cassian being a couple. They're not a couple in that sense, you know, but there's something there that you can talk about and point to specific moments, and it kind of hints at a potential romance had things not gone the way with the story that they did. But yeah, there's multiple ways that could play out. So I think we'll see something a bit more conventional between those two characters and lighthearted to kind of offset the angsty tones of potential Reylo.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Right, just to move things along. Like if so, hypothetical. Say Reylo happens in The Last Jedi. Like so.
Do you mean like a kiss? Is that what?
Yeah.
When
Well,
people
that's
say
the thing.
Reylo
That's the
happens,
thing. Like I
like-
just thought, like when I wrote that, I didn't think about that in enough depth. Oh gosh.
Because like we said, like Reylo is already happening. Like that is
Yeah.
it's there in the story.
Are you asking what we want for like a headcanon? Because what I want as a headcanon is totally different from what.
Oh, we'll get there. We'll get there.
get there.
Like this is going to be about the marketing.
Oh, yeah.
So
Oh, okay.
hypothetical situation where Reylo happens, and just for the sake of argument, let's say a kiss in a moment of passion. Like I said, I don't realistically think that's going to happen, but just say that like unambiguous, so anyone watching it would realize that this is a romance. Reylo happens in The Last Jedi. How do you think they would approach that in the marketing? Like, because obviously that would turn many people's perceptions of those characters from The Force Awakens completely on its head. So how do you think they would reconcile that and like manage it?
I think that they would, if they're going to show it that it's completely that this is what's happening, and to ease people into it, maybe we would see some sort of like hint at Kylo's humanity in the trailers, leading up to it. Not actually Reylo itself, just to show that he's more complex than people realize.
Sure.
And maybe we get some hints that Rey is struggling, right?
Yeah.
And I do. And like if it actually happens, but they don't want to have like a kiss, but they want to show that there is an actual connection there, in The Last Jedi. Like let's say they want to move it past this point where it's ambiguous to like, okay, this is definitely happening.
Yeah.
Then I can see the like that we talked about tropes earlier. So instead of the bridal carry trope, I can see that Pieta trope, right, where someone's injured and being carried, and someone's touching someone's face. And like it's like once like it's basically essentially a kiss without being a kiss, right? Like whether it's Rey touching Kylo's unmasked face, especially the scar, or it's Kylo touching Rey's face. Though I have a feeling that they might try to subvert that trope, right?
Yeah.
I can see that them using that to fully and unequivocally imply that there's something there, right? Because like that would be a very powerful moment, right? Like, you know, where they've gotten past the point where they're enemies and she actually, or like someone actually touches the other person's face. Like that's very intimate, right?
Yeah.
So I can see that happening in like if best case scenario, I mean, personally right now, from what I've seen, I can see that happening.
Yeah.
Personally.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I was thinking that they might do something like one of the trailers for The Force Awakens, I can't remember which one, included the shot from right after the fight with Kylo, where Rey is like next to Finn, like, and she's like over his body, and then she looks up as the light appears, and you see her sobbing. And because of the way that shot is framed in the trailer, you can't tell who she's with. And that shot prompted so much debate and discussion. Some people were saying it was Chewie. Some people were saying it was Han. Some people guessed correctly that it was Finn. So I do wonder if they might do something like that in one of the trailers. Have like a shot that could be Reylo, but equally could be something completely different. So yeah, like silhouettes, or like just a really quick glimpse at something where you can't quite tell which characters it is. I do wonder if they'd do something like that, but that might almost be too much for tease. It was like, it's all insane.
I think they'll probably be really subtle in the marketing. I mean, they might have like the poster. Remember how the poster was like, they have a light between them and they're kind of like on the same side? They're going to do something similar to that. They're going to try and point them as more adversarial now that we know that they're, the main protagonist and antagonist. At the same token, I think that we're going to see little bits and pieces that'll give us life. And then we're probably going to see I think they'll probably keep it as much under wraps as they possibly can. Because, they have to.
No, that makes total sense. Like, I was just thinking about the databank stuff. Like, that was like water in the desert. Like, that's so good to see. It's like, awesome. Like, by databank stuff, I'm just referring to stuff like vulnerable warlord and Kylo and Rey share a mysterious connection. Kylo sensed their destinies were intertwined. How?
That's so
like,
heavy.
All kind of nonsense, Like, sorry, I don't mean to be rude. Like, I love it. It's all amazing nonsense. But yeah, that just made me think, wow, they really are trying to push this home, aren't they? So, yeah. How about you, Kirsty? What's your views on this?
I have trained myself not to expect anything friendly, so I am constantly. I'm pleasantly surprised when things like the commentary and the databank come out, because I judging by the fan reaction to Reylo after The Force Awakens, I thought it was all there in the film plain as day. So I wasn't like, oh my god, this is going to be the huge twist. I was just like, oh wow, that's sexual tension, huh? But obviously that was a minority opinion. So I've been like, well, maybe it is a twist. Like, maybe we're not supposed to see it coming. So they wouldn't play it up, But I don't know. Like, looking at the way they did marketing for Rogue One, and everything seemed a lot more haphazard than I thought it would be. And it might just be that, Rogue One was a weird example because it was the first spin-off and because they had all these reshoots that they didn't know were going to happen from the beginning. So a lot of the trailer footage didn't end up in the movie. I'm hoping that The Last Jedi is a bit more planned out than that. But I still think, like, based on that information from the teaser or whatever it was that they showed at the shareholders meeting, everything is going to be very isolated and give you glimpses of the characters and what they might be up to, but without context. Like, they're going to play on people's expectations. So I'm not expecting anything like, woo, Reylo.
That's a safe choice.
Yep. Yeah.
So that is very safe. It is best to be conservative, I think, and avoid building up expectations too much.
Yeah, but based on that, they are still. And again, this was something that I thought was pretty clear from the end of The Force Awakens, that Rey and Finn were going to be off on separate strands of the story. That they're friends, but they were going to be parted for a while, because she says that out loud. Finn is going to be off with missions regarding the Resistance and the First Order, whereas Rey's is more of a spiritual journey with Luke. But yeah, I guess they might be making that clear.
Yeah.
So as opposed to like marketing Reylo, they're kind of moving people away. I know a lot of people were convinced after seeing the movie that Finn and Rey would end up together. And I know that could still happen in episode 9, but it sounds like, based on what we've been hearing, that it probably isn't on the cards for episode 8. So
yeah,
sure. Right. Okay. So the last bit of this epic Reylo discussion is basically to do a quick spin around everyone and find out what our most outlandish, fanish wishes for Reylo going forward. Like, this does not in any way have to be realistic. Okay, so this is basically asking, if you were writing future movies and you could fulfill every heart's desire as you wished, what would you do with these characters? Okay, Shy, go.
Mine is definitely outlandish. I love tragedy and angst. That's my thing. You know, the darker the better. So in a perfect world, in my headcanon, Rey is a Sean and goes full dark side. Then she teams up with Kylo Ren. They lay waste to Snoke and make a grab for power instead of going back to the Republic. Copious amounts of Sith fan service, and then the recanonization of the entire Old Republic. Probably a Star Forge thrown in there. I would love the Sith Empire to come back. And then on top of all of this, right, they turn into the villains for the next trilogy that you know is coming after this because it's so profitable. So really not based in reality at all. And just every single little thing I love about the Old Republic shoved into the new stuff.
Dream big. Dream big. Natasha, how about you?
I don't think I can follow that up as well.
Yeah, you go for it. Go wild.
Mine's pretty tame. I think it was because Eddie Redmayne said that he auditioned for Kylo and that he did a piece from like Jane Austen, like I think Pride and Prejudice, right? I just really want to see like the awkwardness of like both Kylo and Rey coming to terms with like the nuances of romance or sexuality when they're both like kind of overgrown children. And I also want to see a lot more of their kind of, both of them have a lot of snark, like, you know, more so Kylo, because he's definitely his mother's child, you know, like I want to see him just like completely like maybe put the two of them on the Millennium Falcon and have to, you know, fly together and like have a really horrible time and yell at each other and have all that kind of Empire tension that was so wonderful about Han and Leia. So, you know, kind of mixed with this, you know, verbal riposte or whatever. So that's what I'm looking forward to. If it happens, I would be happy, but I know that my expectations are pretty low. And then I do kind of want Rey to have, this sounds kind of cliche, but I do want her to have the whole kind of embrace her femininity thing, right? Like, because she's definitely kind of categorized more masculine, but I think that, you know, I think it's important to show girls that you can be a strong female character and a warrior and take on all these kind of traditionally heroic masculine attributes, but also be a woman, you know, and have womanly things. And like, she doesn't have possessions. She doesn't have clothes. Like, you know, Leia needs to hook this girl up, right? Like, that's pretty much all I can say. So, yeah. Not that out there, but yeah.
Yeah. No, that sounds really cool. How about you, Kirsty?
I don't really, I'm not like outlandish, but just like there's so much emphasis on both of these characters trying to find their belonging that I feel like inevitably it has to go in that direction where they find it with each other somehow. Like I ship Reylo, but not in like a super obsessively romantic way. It's just that seems to be what the story is, that's between these characters who are both very lonely and, you know, unhappy with how their life has been going. And, you know, Adam Driver's described Kylo in interviews and said that out of all the characters he's portrayed, he identifies the most with Kylo Ren, which is super interesting to me because you get all of this backlash as a fan who does identify with Kylo, that you must be like a fascist in real life and have murderous thoughts towards your own parents and all this crap.
Yeah.
So I don't care really if they end up making out on screen. I guess I would, just to piss off certain people, but just that there's some kind of reconciliation, which I think is inevitable, and that I not necessarily that Kylo comes back to the light in terms of a redemption story, but that they meet in the middle somehow, and that Rey integrates with that notion of dark and light as well. Like that she's in The Force Awakens, it's very much positioned that she's a light side character, but there's no real evidence for that because, yes, there's this like idea of her being the optimistic heroine who goes through all this suffering and strife and is still very good. But there is that inner darkness there. You can see it, and it really comes out, especially in their fight. So that has to relate to their dynamic somehow. So
yeah,
I don't have like a specific, this is how I want the story to go. I just want to see what it is.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah. Sorry, that's so boring.
No, mine's
that's
boring.
fine. It's good to modulate expectations.
It's not even just expectations. It's just like I'm super. I loved The Force Awakens, so I feel like I'm gonna love whatever else they're gonna do with these characters.
Yes.
You know, I'm here for the story.
Yeah. For me, like, I promise this won't be as long-winded as the opener makes it sound. Like, I think of the song Anthem from the 1980s musical Chess by ABBA members Bjorn and Benny.
Nice.
And there's a lyric in this song called "My land's only borders are around my heart," or something to that effect. I really like Chess, okay? And basically the idea is that these characters, they've been dealing with all these political affiliations and all these like macro factors that have like forced them to make certain decisions in their personal lives that they otherwise wouldn't have. And that song, it's basically a rejection of that. It's like, no, I don't want to deal with other people's bullshit. Like, I'm just going to do what's right for me and what's right according to my emotions and my needs and my desires and stuff. So it's like a song about self-determination. And in my dream scenario, by the end of The Last Jedi, Rey and Kylo will both have had their eyes opened to how much BS is going down with the Jedi and Snoke and whatever the hell he's doing. And they're like, no, it. We're going away and screw everything, and we're just going to go and do our own thing and leave this fight because it's not our problem.
Yeah.
I think that really makes sense for the adolescent stuff that he was talking about.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I don't think it's incredibly outlandish. Have we all got our wildest fantasies out of our systems?
For now.
Yep.
Our wildest Reylo fantasies.
Yeah. I'm sure after episode 8 we will come back and reassess everything, right? Like that's going to then show us how quickly things are going to progress either way. Like so.
So no, we're gonna have very different views on things by that point. Right, so I hope that you all enjoyed listening to that hilarity. Like, actually, no, like, other people were being, like, quite sensible. Like, I was just being a bit silly and stupid in that whole Reylo discussion. Like, I don't know why I do, like, such stupid things all the time, like bringing up chess.
No, you have more fun with it. I'm, like, too scared to get my hopes up, so I'm always like, I'll go for the most boring and non-controversial speculation.
Yeah, like, I guess for me it's because, like, I like to think I'm quite good at not getting overly attached to things.
Yeah.
So even though I'll come up with these wildly, like, optimistic predictions and stuff, like, obviously not, like, I don't think they're ludicrously optimistic. Like, say, it's not the whole white picket fence Reylo scenario. I wouldn't predict that. But yeah, like, I like to think that I won't be devastated if that doesn't happen. You know,
Yeah.
so just expressing it as my personal desire for where I'd like the story to go. Like, I don't feel like I'm making myself too vulnerable by saying that, but I totally understand why other people want to be more conservative.
Yeah, I do have, like, ideas, like headcanons, I suppose that's what they're called, like, that I'll talk about with friends and that, but, like, having a podcast, sometimes you feel like putting it out there almost binds you to the theory, and you don't want to be like, oh, put it in writing, or, like, here's the receipt that I thought this. It's like, it's just a possibility. So I'll, like, speculate more privately, but it's just like, oh, just wait for the story, you know, we'll see what happens.
No, sure. Like, I think I lost all credibility when, like, I went from believing in Rey Skywalker to becoming a full-blown Reylo.
No, because that's not what it's about. It's like, I like that that's your path. Like, it wasn't mine, but it's like, you do adapt your understanding of the story as new information comes out. Like, that's how it probably should work, you know?
Sure.
And likewise, if there had been something to come out after the movie, aside from the general fandom reception to it, to tell me, you're crazy for thinking this, like, if Pablo had debunked it, or if there was really strong evidence that Rey and Kylo were related and what I saw was a mistake, then I would have accepted it, you know?
Yeah, sure.
So,
yeah.
Still in the running.
Yeah, no, exactly. Right, then that brings us to our next segment, which is It Came from Reddit. Yeah, we're doing the full show, guys. Be happy. Yeah, and this isn't anything earth-shattering, but it's basically that there was a post on the Star Wars Leaks subreddit, and it's basically from someone, like, on one of the LEGO forums, And this person is meant to have like a very firm track record when it comes to like information about the Lego sets and which characters are going to be in them and which ships and so on. So yeah, this information is meant to be quite solid. Like, I can't personally verify it, but like, it's like an upper echelon of Reddit rumor. So do with it what you will. And yeah, so I will just read out the names of the sets where they're actually quite interesting and worth listing. And so we have 75176, Finn, BB-8, question mark. 75179, Kylo Ren's tie, Kylo Ren, no helmet, question mark, question mark, question mark. 75187, buildable, BB-8. 75188, Poe, pilot, officer. 75189, 2 stormtroopers, Rey, Luke, question mark. So, Kirsty, oh man, we really are dealing with the scraps right now. Like, what stuck out to you about this?
Well, we do have to be careful with Lego stuff because they're not canon.
Yes.
And I don't know if we've spoken about it before, but there's some stuff in the Force Awakens Lego video game that's like amusing, especially from a Reylo ship perspective, but it's not in the actual story, so it's like you got to take it all with a huge grain of salt.
Are you talking about Kylo when like Rey's beating him and he's going, yes, feel it, coursing
strike
through
me
you.
harder.
Oh no.
Very kid friendly.
Yeah, it's very kinky.
Yeah, so, but if, we're looking at these and thinking maybe they could play into certain elements of the film, I like the idea of Finn and BB-8 sharing more screen time, because I really love that part of The Force Awakens where like BB gives him the thumbs up.
Yes.
And like
That's
realizes
so
that Finn isn't being quite honest with Rey.
Yeah.
And then this idea of, because we've heard about Kylo's TIE fighter before from making Star Wars, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, him being in there makes sense, and Kylo without a helmet sounds good to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because we'll finally get to see that scar.
Yeah.
The 2 stormtroopers with Rey and Luke is interesting because that's something that hasn't so far played into any of the spoilers that we've heard.
Yes.
So we have Rey and Luke. I know we're getting into proper spoilers here again. Sorry. But we know that Rey and Luke are going to encounter Kylo with the Knights of Ren on Act 2, but there wasn't any mention of stormtroopers. It seemed like it was Kylo coming just with his guys, but not necessarily on like an official First Order mission. So this could be something else entirely.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, no, like I definitely found that the set description the most interesting thing. Like I say, it's very important not to take the Lego set configurations too seriously, because obviously these are toys to be sold to children, and so they just try to make them as attractive and marketable to kids as possible. And that often means they're like chucking characters who they think are going to make it more marketable, like irrespective of whether those characters actually interact or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in like one of the Lego sets for The Force Awakens, for example, they had like members of Candy Club come with like a Millennium Falcon set.
Right.
And obviously in Candy Club they never actually go on the Millennium Falcon. Like they're vaguely in the vicinity of it because they're on like Han's cargo ship. But like it still doesn't properly reflect how that scene plays out in canon.
Right.
But yeah, like to run with this and say that yes, there are stormtroopers with Rey and Luke. That's interesting. Like it like either suggests that stormtroopers actually go on to Act 2 at some point, like potentially with Kylo, potentially otherwise, who knows.
Yeah, does that question mark mean that another character is there, they just don't know who?
I think the question marks, they indicate that it's something that's currently being kept under wraps. So like either a ship name or a character name, or basically something that they can't share right now because it's confidential. Yeah, so it either indicates that stormtroopers would be going to the island, or that Rey and Luke leave the island and encounter stormtroopers elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like in any event, it's intriguing. I also find the prospect of like having a Lego minifigure of Kylo without the helmet like quite interesting, because this it would presumably be the first wave of Last Jedi toys. and that would differentiate this from the first Force Awakens toys, because they all had Kylo firmly helmeted, if you pardon the expression. So yeah, like, it would indicate that maybe they're not going to be quite so shy about hiding his face this time around. But yeah, that's extrapolation, so I might well be wrong. But yeah, like, no, it's an interesting thing to see, and because news is so very non-existent, it's like, oh, thank goodness, anything.
I wonder if the question mark with Finn and BB-8 is Kelly Marie Tran's character.
Quite possibly, yeah. It'd make a lot of sense.
Cool.
It'd be cool. I'd like to see her interact with BB-8 too.
Yeah, same. I love BB-8. I just can't wait to see more of him.
BB-8's so adorable. How can you not love BB-8?
I remember before I saw the film, I was speaking to my mother-in-law, and she was like, the new droid is too cute. Like, she thought he was way too pandering, and she's a big R2 fan, so, you know, it makes sense.
Does she still think that, or has she been converted?
I think she's, like, made her peace with it, but she felt like it was a bit too fan servicey. You know, it was like they'd gone out of their way to just make this droid the cutest thing ever, which is true, but I love it.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Right, then we move on to what is going to be our substantial question time. So, we asked you specifically to send in your questions this week, because we wanted to get through as many as possible. And yeah, we will go and see how many we can make it through. So, enjoy. Right, the first question is from an anonymous listener via email. Hello ladies! One thing I've noticed about the Star Wars fandom is how much it loves its villains. Darth Vader is hailed as the face of the franchise. Characters like Boba Fett and Darth Maul are fan favourites. And according to TV tropes, 70% of StarDestroyer.net forum users wouldn't mind living under the Empire's rule.
What? I've never heard of StarDestroyer.net, which is probably silly of me, but
I've never heard of that.
That's crazy.
That is crazy.
The Empire is a fascist regime.
Oh no.
All hail Palpatine. Seriously, these people are weird. Maybe it's just a joke, right?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. It might have been like when everyone said they were a Jedi as their religion.
Yeah, probably.
Let's hope so. Which is why I was astonished to see the staggering level of hatred aimed at Kylo Ren and his fans. Apparently he's the only major Star Wars villain you're not allowed to like. It's considered a stain on your moral character if you do. None of the other villains or their fans are treated this way. No one will call you a Nazi or an abuse apologist if you think Darth Vader is cool. No one will accuse you of woo-bifying Anakin or excusing his actions if you consider Palpatine's manipulation of him a critical factor in his fall. Nor will they ignore it or insist that being negatively impacted was Anakin's fault. But they do it all the time with Kylo, which seems both hypocritical and hurtful to the people who love and identify with him. I've also noticed that female Kylo Ren fans tend to get harassed the most, and the insults are often gendered when they do. Their sexual history gets questioned just as much, if not more, than their intelligence, morality, and political beliefs. They get compared to serial killer groupies. Their fascination with the character is chalked up to bad boy obsessions and superficial lust. Even several feminist blogs I've come across cast judgment on fangirls who romanticize him, saying that doing so teaches little girls to desire abusive boyfriends. The personal attacks and moral panic become much harsher if you also want Kylo to redeem himself and reconcile with Rey, because that would somehow debase Rey and send bad messages to little girls, something no one ever seems to worry about with little boys. Personally, I believe one reason why Kylo has so many female fans is because he fits into an archetype, namely the heroine's shadow animus, that women have been telling the stories about for thousands of years. So to me, it's understandable why so many girls are drawn to him. I don't think girls liking or even identifying with him is inherently bad or dangerous, but treating those who do like monsters is practically encouraged in some circles. I'm normally not one to cry sexism at everything in fandom, but this is a trend that's becoming increasingly hard to ignore. What are your thoughts on this phenomenon, and what would you say to the people who engage in such behaviour? First of all, this is such a great question.
It is. Like, I feel like I could have written this, because...
Yeah, it's really like you, actually. It's almost like your style of writing, too.
Oh, well, I didn't send it, just to clarify. I'm not sending in emails to our own podcast.
You're not that sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I can answer this because I have received like a lot of angry messages from people who like are really like quite aggressive about the fact that I do identify with Kylo and like him as a character. Like I tweeted out some stuff about him, like, you know, that there are a lot of fans who do identify with him, and here are some of the reasons why that might be. And then I got some like aggressive responses on Twitter, like, imagine identifying with a fascist murderer. And it's like, I don't want to say to people, oh, you clearly do not understand Star Wars, because that just comes across as like snobby and unnecessarily mean, but he is the shadow figure in the story, so you kind of are supposed to identify with him, and that's what Rey's journey will end up being. You know, like the same thing happened with Vader and Luke. Like someone appears monstrous, and then there's something more going on underneath. Like that's kind of the point of these stories. So it might just be that because we have the first act now, you know, so people are processing the story as it goes along, and Kylo Ren seemed like a monster, so that's what people perceive him as, and that's okay. Just do not be an asshole to other people. Yeah, like that should be the basic requirement. But obviously, this is the internet age, and people are horrible to strangers all the time. So I think there's definitely an element of sexism directed at female fans. Like, I'd agree with that. It's probably healthy of us to kind of distinguish between the crap that people talk about online versus in real life or in the media, because, you know, a lot of us use Tumblr and contribute on Star Wars message boards and that kind of thing. And your view can kind of get warped, and you start to think that that's like everyone in the fandom is out to get you. And that's not really the case. Like, it's not totally representative of how most people who like Star Wars think. It's just kind of a vocal minority that is very loud, so it can seem like the majority. So try not to let it get you down too much. It gets me down, so I'm not like, I'm saying do as I say, not as I do. But I think the important thing to note is that the creators very clearly intended for Kylo to be a character that we should be a fan of. Like, I always find this observation that fangirls romanticize him. It's kind of amusing, because if you've ever heard J.J. Abrams speak about Kylo Ren, he very clearly romanticizes him himself, and he did in the story and in his commentary. So, you know, he's just very complex, tortured. He's done up to look like a prince. Like, he's that kind of character. So it's a classic combination. We've seen that before, and I talked about that last week in the Spotlight discussion. So while that kind of character isn't for everyone, and it's not for a lot of people who do like the Darth Mauls and Palpatines, it is a valid characterization. Like, it's a recognized trope throughout history and storytelling. And some people, like, they just prefer the straight bad guys, and that's fine. But you shouldn't feel bad for enjoying a character or storyline just because someone else doesn't. Like, if someone's giving you grief, just block or ignore them. Like, it's so not worth engaging with those people, because if someone's being that aggressive to you and they don't even know you, it's not really about you. They just have something that they need to get off their chest. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a really complicated situation when it comes to people's feelings towards Kylo and how they react to that character and his fans. I think one of the most crucial factors in all this is that Kylo is very, very different from the other factors we've had. We've never had a masked, scary villain reveal himself to actually be quite a beautiful, dark-haired man underneath, tall, dark, and handsome. And I think you can't underestimate how much that threw people and how much that impacted people's perception of that character. Because when you see general Star Wars fans talking about Kylo, often the line you'll get is, "Oh, I loved him until he took the mask off, and then he completely lost all the intimidation factor. I was no longer scared of him. He just struck me as this whiny crybaby." I see that all the time, and yeah, I think it just means they can't take the character seriously because they disrespect him, because they don't perceive him as a threat as they perceived Vader as a threat, and because they don't respect him. I think that filters through into being unable to respect his fans, and only assigning negative motivations for why they might like that character, or at least reductive explanations for why they might like that character. So you can't possibly like Kylo because he's actually interesting or compelling on screen, because he wasn't interesting or compelling to me. He's just a whiny crybaby wuss. So therefore you must only like him because he's really attractive, and for whatever reasons girls like bad boys and stuff. So that is the kind of attitude I've come across a lot. Like, there's just this denial of the fact that there's any interest in Kylo beyond the superficial.
Yeah, I see a lot of people as well, like, trying to police the way people like him. So you can like him in a certain way. You can like him if you sign on the dotted line that he is the villain and he did all of these things wrong, and you acknowledge that, and you like him as a villain and only that way.
Yeah.
But if you like him because you see that there is more to him and you want to talk about that stuff, you get accused of woobifying, which is like this weird fandom term. That's like, supposedly you're saying he did nothing wrong. I've literally never seen someone say that Kylo Ren did nothing wrong, or if they do, they're clearly doing it in this trollish way to get a response.
Yeah.
Because anyone who watched the film knows that he did things wrong. Like,
he did things very wrong.
Yeah, you do come across blogs on Tumblr who are like, Kylo Ren defense blog, he did nothing wrong. And I do think that it's worth talking about these ideas that are coming through in new canon. We're going to have a spotlight discussion on Empire's End next week, so not to kind of spoil that, but there have been hints in canon, and this is from The Force Awakens as well, from Leia's discussion with Han, that, it can be argued that there was a form of abuse from Snoke, or at least this targeting and this predatory aspect from Snoke towards Ben Solo. So it's actually quite valid, and especially if people identify with that because of their own personal history, to defend Kylo as a character. Because people do that with Anakin. You can acknowledge, as this person says in the question, you can acknowledge that he was manipulated, but still was responsible for his own actions. It's not one or the other. It's complicated, and that's what makes the story interesting. Yeah.
I think in quite a few ways, Kylo's almost too complicated. So he's this character who is full of complications, and I'd say he has far more emotional depth than any other villain in Star Wars, easily, by like a country mile. And I really do think that means that people don't know how to receive the character. Obviously a lot of people do embrace him and appreciate him in lots of ways, not just like shippers and not just people who want Reylo to happen. Like, there has been lots of admiration like for the characterization of Kylo, especially in the reviews for the film. I found like it's hard to find a review of The Force Awakens where they don't praise the idea of Kylo Ren as a character and like how he's portrayed. But I think it does go against people's expectations of what villains in Star Wars should be. And because he breaks the mold in so many ways, in terms of his appearance, in terms of like his demonstrations of his emotions, and like in terms of like how he's portrayed in the fandom, I think all of those things, it just leaves people, especially people from like more established Star Wars fandom circles, it leaves them with a bad taste in their mouth. And yeah, like it just filters through into unhelpful and rather mean attitudes towards the people who actually like the character. It's a bit sad and frustrating. And yeah, there absolutely is a gendered element to it. Like, if you're a woman who likes Kylo Ren, then I think your motives are immediately questioned in a way a man's would not be. Like, people are automatically suspicious that, it's just because you find Adam Driver attractive or something like that. And like, it's just so wrong, because like, even like when you do find Adam Driver attractive, that's not to say that's the only reason you like the character. Like, and yeah, like, it's just insulting and patronizing, and it annoys me.
Yeah, that's why I said just do not engage. Like, unless you have something like you're not going to get really upset about the fact that you're responding, like you have something to point to, or you enjoy engaging in those kind of debates. But a lot of the time people are just kind of out for blood. So it sounds so silly because it's just like it's about fiction. Like, we can have different opinions, but when people start making assumptions like, you must be a fascist in real life, or you're a racist, or like, imagine identifying with a murderer, which is what someone said to me. Like, it's just so stupid. It
really, really is. Yeah. And like, say, in the first instance, the people who want you to identify with and care about Kylo are the filmmakers. I think they would not have presented him with all this depth and all this care put into his characterization if they didn't want you to feel empathy for him and be curious about how he became what he became.
Right.
So it's not like this is just people projecting depth onto a character for shallow reasons. It's about a character who already has depth, and people are just picking up on that and responding to that. And for a whole host of complicated reasons, people perceive that as a threat and they don't like it.
Yeah, I think partly it's because of how people perceive like Vader and Anakin in the original trilogy and the prequels respectively, right? Like it's pretty compartmentalized, even though I'm not sure that was George Lucas's intent. Like a lot of fans do seem to distinguish between, oh, here's Anakin and here's Vader, and it's like the whole point is that he's actually the same person.
Yeah. I think we found that at the Star Wars Identities exhibits, actually. Yeah. They have these like little character stations where there's like interactive screens, and there's separate screens for Anakin and Vader.
I thought that was so bizarre.
It is bizarre. Like, he's like,
the point is that he was this, you know, very emotional, tempestuous boy who had all this potential and had a lot of love to give, and you know, had this relationship with this woman who he absolutely adored, but was so terrified to lose her and got manipulated because of that. And then you know, he is presented differently as Vader, obviously, because he's like lost to the dark side. But the whole point at the end of Return of the Jedi is that he was still in there somewhere, and Luke came back and brought him back to the light. So it's just a bit weird to artificially separate the two. And I think the confusion is that with Kylo Ren in the sequel trilogy, you're having both elements there at the same time. You're having the prequel Anakin and original Vader, like together, smushed into one character. And he's talking about like, oh, Ben Solo's gone. It's like he's obviously not, but you have those two sides of the personality there, and he's being torn apart because of that.
Yeah.
So it's a much more interesting approach, in my opinion. But
yeah, totally. Because, like you say, it means it's impossible for people to compartmentalize it like they compartmentalize Anakin and Vader. Because Kylo Ren is both at the same time. Mm-hmm. There's not like a clear transition point. Like, because when Anakin like has all his limbs chopped off and is put into the suit, then that's a pretty clear dividing line between different parts in his life. Mm-hmm. Obviously, when he was still like hot and attractive Hayden Christensen, he was still Vader for like a day or so and still doing really awful things like killing younglings. But like that really is like at the extreme tail end. It's not for any prolonged period. Like, for the most part, there's like a clear dividing line between Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader. Mm-hmm. And there's none of that with Kylo Ren, because like it's not like he underwent some like extreme physical transformation like Anakin did. He literally just stuck a helmet on his head and decided, okay, I'm going to go to the First Order and Snoke now, for reasons that remain mysterious. But yeah, like there's more for him to go back to, and there's still more Ben Solo in him than he would like. Whereas this... So I do think it's like 50-50 Ben Solo, Kylo Ren. Whereas with Darth Vader and Anakin, like when Darth Vader was in that suit, I do think Anakin was always still a part of him. It was almost more like a glimmer than like still constituting a massive part of himself, because he'd lost so much and changed so much. Yeah,
I do feel like it's going to mean that the sequel trilogy is a more sophisticated exploration of those Jungian ideas of the dark and light within one person. Yeah. And how we all have the potential for good and bad, but as you say, because there was that separation, and because there was such a time difference between the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, people distinguish between them as these two very distinct stories, when actually it's all the same story.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, totally. Yeah, that was a fantastic question, so thank you very much for sending that in. Okay, and then the next email is from Irene, and this goes... My first query is actually not from the sequel trilogy, but Revenge of the Sith. Coming out of it, my main criticism is that Padme died of a broken heart. Recently, I was watching a YouTube channel called Cinema Wins. He doesn't really do theory videos, but just talks about what he likes in certain films. And at the end of his review, he tagged on this theory. Anyway, he basically just speculates that while Vader was being put back together by medic droids, as he was struggling to stay alive, with the help of Sidious, he used the dark side to take Padme's life so that Vader could live. He also says that since Darth Sidious never actually told us the process for extending life with the use of the dark arts, that taking another's life to extend someone else's could possibly be how it's done. He then states that unless Sidious just flat out lied to Vader, he couldn't really have known that Padme was dead. I'm assuming because it seemed like Obi-Wan got her out of there before Sidious arrived on the planet, but I'm not sure. To try and hammer home the point, he brings up the audio effects during the few seconds that Vader's mask is being lowered onto him, and points out that Anakin's heartbeat stops for 12 seconds. While he admits that it could have just been added to symbolise Anakin dying and Vader being born, and may not have anything to do with Padmé's death, he found it significant enough to point it out. Personally, the more I think about it, the more believable it seems to me, because I always found it weird that someone like Padmé couldn't fight to stay alive for her children. Do you think this could be possible? Kirsty, what do you think?
So I think it's understandable that some fans don't buy this idea of Padme dying of a broken heart, because it does seem out of character, right? But I think so. On one sense, it like doesn't make sense, right? It's because she does have these children depending on her, but I don't think it's supposed to be realistic. So like this idea of her dying of a broken heart, it's more supposed to be like this fairy tale element, because George Lucas wanted that tragic ending. And I think in a way it would kind of undermine Anakin's arc, and like the fact that he has that irony in the story, right? That he's desperately trying to hold on to everything, and because of that he loses it. Like he ends up throwing it away.
Yeah. Because
George Lucas has always stressed that Star Wars is about love. Like he says, love people. That's basically all Star Wars is. So Anakin really did break Padmé's heart. Like that's what she says. Like, because that's Anakin. It's not Palpatine. Because he became everything that she opposed. Like she still has this hope that there's light in him, but it becomes so buried that he stays that way for 20 years before Luke comes along. So I don't know. Like, it's fine for people to have these headcanons. Like that's one of the things I like about Star Wars, that it kind of leaves these gaps for people to theorize and interpret it how they like. So completely understand that some fans would not be okay with this idea of Padme dying like that, because it can be perceived as this form of character assassination. And in many ways, George did kind of drop the ball with Padme's character. Like there's things about it that I don't love, but first and foremost, I think it is about the creator's intent that's most important if you want to understand the story. So with like Star Wars as mythology, it's designed to kind of evoke these very broad stroke ideas and emotions. You can take from it what you want, and that, kind of enriches and guides your own life. So it kind of comes down to what every fan wants to understand, right? Like it's kind of left with enough open end that if you want to believe that Padme was killed by Palpatine instead of Anakin, you can. I don't think of it that way, but it doesn't really matter because it's all fiction. Like, I know that it comes down to that. It's like, it's a story. So it sounds kind of silly to say it because we have this podcast where we talk about stories for 2 hours every week, but
yes,
it doesn't matter in that it doesn't matter what another fan thinks if you think something different. So it's not my interpretation, but I completely get that other people would prefer to see it that way. What's your call?
I find it quite a compelling theory. I'm not sure I believe it, but like I do think it's quite cool, and I think, like, if anything, I'd say it almost like adds to the irony, because obviously Palpatine, like, he makes this offer to Anakin that, like, I know how to save life, like, because my master taught me, like, Plagueis, of course, the famous Plagueis. Oh gosh, sorry, I'm just thinking of all the Snoke theories. I can't bring up Plagueis without thinking of Snoke. Oh no. Yeah, so obviously there's that whole deal with the devil element, and he makes that promise to him. And I do think there's supreme irony in Anakin accepting this deal to save Padme, but inadvertently, in order to make the deal work, Padme has to die. But then, yeah, you're right, like, it doesn't really work, because obviously Padme is the person that he wants to save.
I just think that if this really was what George Lucas wanted to say with the story, it would have been a bit clearer.
Yeah.
Because it's a very specific thing. Like, if it really is supposed to be that Palpatine ended up being responsible for Padme dying, they probably wouldn't have showed Anakin choking her, probably wouldn't have said about Padme saying, you're breaking my heart, and then that's what they say later on when she is dying. There is that callback. So I think it's, I don't know, it's tough.
No, I think you're right. I changed my mind. So basically I do think that I understand why people like this theory and want to believe it, because I think, like, it adds sense to what people perceive as nonsense, because they can't think of any compelling reason, like in a scientific or biological sense, why Padme would die. Because obviously the film itself makes that explicit by saying that she's medically healthy. There's no reason why she should die in that moment. But like Kirsty says, that the point isn't that there's necessarily like an immediate direct reason why Padme dies. It's more just like the extent of her grief is so powerful that it literally kills her. And like that's the tragedy of it, and the tragedy of Anakin's love for her and his actions, because in trying to action his love by doing whatever he can to save her, then that's what kills her, because the lengths he will go to save her like are absolutely appalling to her, and she's horrified by it, and she can't bear it to the point where she can't live. And I do kind of wish they hadn't gone down that road, because just the idea of a woman giving up on life when she's just had children, like, I do struggle to fathom it somewhat, but I think I understand what the intent was, at least.
Yeah, I do think Star Wars, and maybe the prequels specifically, do raise these questions, because it's a story, so it is like whatever the writer intended, like that's what's supposed to come across, and it's just kind of down as to how well executed you think it is, and also it's within our right as consumers of the story not to like a particular element.
Yeah, sure.
So we can totally say like we don't like or buy the way that Padme died, and that's fair. Yeah. It's just it doesn't change what Lucas was trying to say.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right. Then the next email is from Darkly Doodlin via email again, which is a great name. Right, and then they say, "Hey, you probably hear this all the time, but I love your podcast. You guys are so smart and a joy to listen to." Oh, thank you.
Oh yeah, you can keep telling us that.
Yeah,
we don't hear
please
that
do.
Too much.
Yeah, we like ego stroking. Thank you. I have a question that's honestly a little up in the air, but hey, to contextualize, in one of the Force Awakens comic adaptations, Kylo's lightsaber got chopped in half by Rey. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
My mind is a hive of scum and villainy. I'm going to move on. It's unclear if this also happened in the movie or not. Do you think they're going to replace Kylo's saber, or just have him repair it if it is in fact permanently damaged? It seems like a really iconic thing at this point, but I wouldn't put it past them to change it, if only to sell more toys. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think. Thank you.
Grow up, Rachel.
I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. I will cut that out. I will cut that out. Yeah, no, like, I can definitely see them changing the saber, and I think you're absolutely dead on the nose on that. It would probably be for, like, cynical marketing reasons.
Yeah. Do we have any spoilers
if they
about
make
that
mine about Kylo's saber?
Yeah.
Not that I have heard.
Okay, so it's still kind of up in the air.
Yeah, like there's no confirmation on anything about that, I don't think. Yeah, like, so I reckon they're probably going to change it, but it will be like minor modifications. I think they might make it less fuzzy, for example. So they might have him refine it more. But yeah, like, I really do think the main motive behind any changes like that is ultimately to merchandise it and say, hey, look at this new Last Jedi Kylo Ren figure, and look how different it is from the Force Awakens Kylo figure, huh?
Yeah. They are going to have to do that, because everyone who bought a Kylo Ren lightsaber from the Force Awakens, there's going to have to be a reason for them to want to buy the next one. They're
Yes.
just the exact same. It's just not going to happen. So, yes, in the most cynical viewpoint, that will be why, but it should also reflect the character's development in some way, ideally, if they're doing their job as storytellers. So, whether it's more refined or a different color or whatever it is, you know, there's got to be some kind of story explanation for it. Not
I'd
like,
love it if they like spoke to Adam and said, "Hey Adam, we're gonna treat you like Samuel L. Jackson, like, in just what's your favorite color? We're gonna make your lightsaber your favorite color."
yeah, I mean, because didn't Adam Driver? He was talking about the saber as a metaphor for the character in interviews before the film came out, right?
Yeah, I think I saw several different people do that, actually.
So, yeah, it would just make sense that as the character grows and changes, like, depending on which way he does, the saber would change to kind of reflect that. It was kind of left up in the air at the end of the actual movie, whether she totally destroyed it or whether it was just kind of extinguished by the snow.
Yeah.
I take all the comic books and that as with a big grain of salt, because they might be canon on one level, but the film is king. So
yeah, and those Marvel comics are bad.
Yeah, that's that.
Not to say it like it necessarily undermines their validity as canon sources, but it does kind of in my mind, because they just seem so slapped together in so many ways. It's like, I'm not sure how much thought was put into this.
Right. There's just no way to compare that with what's in the film, because that was obviously overseen by the director, the writers, story group, everyone. So
yeah,
it's fine to look like I look into all of these things for clues, but still with the idea that, okay, well, if Rian Johnson wanted to do something completely different, he would. You know, there's nothing actually stopping him, and that's really all that canon means. So
yeah, precisely. Right, then the next question is from Brianna via email. So my question is, if when Reylo does become canon, which I believe it will Daisy have to defend Rey's decision to love her enemy? If she does, will it finally die? Because she's obviously okay with the idea of liking Reylo art, for example. Having Josh Gad get Judi Dench to ask about Reylo, which is part of the reason I believe it will happen. Just like Emma Watson had to defend Belle against those saying Belle had Stockholm Syndrome. So I guess she's just asking, like, how would Daisy have to deal with, like, anyone who was to come out and question, like, is this right? Was this the right direction for the story? Like, do you think she'd have to do the whole Emma Watson thing?
Definitely. Yeah, and same. Even after that, I don't think the controversy would die, because we were saying last week, you know, this kind of character dynamic and, you know, this fairy tale structure of learning to love someone who you hated, that has been controversial since the beginning of storytelling. And I am kind of dreading the amount of think pieces, just like from the Beauty and the Beast. Like, there's going to be so many of them. There probably already have been. And if this is where they're going with Star Wars, it's going to happen then as well. And I'm sure they had them for Anakin and Padme too.
Yeah.
You know, people still talk about that relationship as problematic, and it is, like, but I just think this is kind of funny when people, like, point out these things in fiction that are problematic, because it's like, yeah, that's kind of the point. Like, that's what conflict and drama is. That's what makes the story interesting, that we can have these conversations about it and evokes emotion and gets people talking about something. Like, that's what storytellers want. It's art.
Yeah, it's like, you can't have every film be like Patterson, where it's about this lovely happy couple where absolutely nothing really comes between them because they're so in love and so secure and, like, everything's great.
Right.
Like, that's great for a Jim Jarmusch movie, but, like, it's probably not going to work in, like, a mainstream operatic sci-fi series,
right,
where you need those, like, high dramatic stakes and you need that conflict. So yeah, like, it's going to be, like, a fundamental element of the story. I'm sure there would be controversy, especially now, because I really do think that the way the media landscape's evolved, it means that people are much more, like, vigilant about things like that. Like, and I do think that's good. I do think it's good to have discussions about these things, like, in a constructive way. But yeah, like, I think if anything, the press tour for Beauty and the Beast will almost be like a dry run for what Daisy Ridley has to go through if Reylo does become canon, because I'm sure she'd be asked similar questions to the questions that Emma Watson's been asked, and she'd have to, like, defend it and explain it and rationalise it from her perspective as much as possible.
I think that would be true whether it was romantic or not, honestly. Like, there's such a resistance, even if they turn out to be related, there's such a resistance to the idea that Kylo Ren could be redeemed and then be accepted back into the fold. And as Rey is the main character, that would be kind of through her perspective. I think there would still be a need to address that, like, whether it was romantic or not.
Like, and to be fair, I think we've actually already seen Daisy start to address it, because like, she brought it up in an interview. I can't remember, like, which, like, outlet it was, but she brought it up herself, and she was, like, saying about how there's all these, like, interesting conversations, like, about chemistry and connection, and, like, abuse and manipulation and stuff. So she was already then, like, discussing it in this, like, even-handed way, like, acknowledging that there's these strong debates and, like, these strong feelings about it on different sides. So yeah, she might have almost been doing, like, a bit of, like, media training for herself.
Oh yeah, and not just, like, media training, but, like, actually talking to the director, the writers, and her fellow actors about the story. Like, they would have been having these conversations about the characters' motives and development, right? So
yeah,
you know, it totally makes sense that that's something that she's thinking about as she's depicting the character. And she said before, like, she knows that, you know, what people responded to most positively with Rey in The Force Awakens, and that she feels just like Harry did for Leia. She feels like the custodian for the character now. So it's something that she's very conscious about. Like, how is this going to be perceived? Like, are people going to appreciate the development of the character, or is there going to be some form of backlash? Which there's always going to be. There's always going to be someone on the internet who is unhappy with how the story goes, especially with Star Wars. Like, it's just a saga that generates controversy, often with those people who profess to love it most.
Yes.
So, you know, that's what makes it interesting.
I think the level of controversy is proportionate to how much people care about it, to be fair.
Right.
Like, so I think people care about it so much that they form these, like, wildly out of proportion expectations and beliefs about how Star Wars should be. And so then if it contravenes those, then it becomes a huge issue that we must rant about and rave about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting to see that.
Yeah, you know, the Beauty and the Beast one's probably a good comparison, not because the story is necessarily going to go that same way, but that through all of the controversy, it's still a very beloved story. Like, that's why Disney have decided to remake it. It's already been hugely financially successful. Like, they proved that with opening weekend. It's already made a ton of money. People love it. So, yeah, like, I wouldn't worry about the idea of a backlash. I'm not sure if this person is, or just saying generally, like, it's just part and parcel of the media circus now with movies that evoke something unexpected or controversial. Yeah. And they'll definitely have a PR strategy in place. Like, if they had that for Beauty and the Beast, they will have it for Star Wars for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Like, it's not like they're going to go in with, like, their eyes closed. They're going to be prepared. Like, so, and it was interesting. I think I saw, like, again, another interview from Daisy, and she said something along the lines of she's a bit worried about how people will respond to Rey after The Last Jedi, and they see what she does. And I can't help but think that might well be about, like, what happens with Kylo and Rey. Like, not even necessarily in a romantic sense, but like Kirsty says, like, even if she forgives him, like, or, like, decides to work together with him, I can see people questioning the character's judgment and saying, why would she do this? Why would she forgive him? Because, yeah, there are just these incredibly strong feelings about Kylo. But yeah, interesting question, so thank you. Right, and then we have a question from Lainey via email. Have we considered the possibility that Rey knows why she was left on Jakku, or at least has some idea, whatever reassuring words her guardians gave her when they left? Not necessarily who her parents are or where she's from. This comes from her initial exchange of BB-8. She asks the droid what they're doing on Jakku, and after the reply she says, classified, me too, big secret, and then it's dropped and never really explored or explained. This could possibly play into her being of imperial and or some other kind of important origins. What little girl would be so important that she would be abandoned on a backwater planet in order to hide? Or maybe, to separate her from others, what if Rey was what people were trying to run from? Interesting ideas. What do you make of this, Kirsty?
Yeah, I mean, Rey never actually says that she doesn't know who her family is. It's kind of funny because obviously it's a secret for the audience, but from her perspective, it might not be a mystery at all. Yes. It's something that like she just chooses not to share potentially with BB-8 and Finn and Han because, well, they don't ask, but also that, I don't know, it's like something that the audience is not supposed to know yet. Obviously, there is like Rey's parentage is part of the mystery box, but there's nothing that says she doesn't know who they are. Because, in fact, it almost points to the idea that she does. Like, if she's waiting for them, she must think that she's going to recognize them when they come back, right? Or at least they're going to think so. They're going to recognize her, and obviously she keeps the hairstyle because, well, that seems to be a logical assumption to make, that if she keeps that same hairstyle for 15 years, it's like they want to recognize each other, like, once they're reunited. So, yeah, it's totally possible.
Yeah. Like, I definitely think that Rey recognizes that she's there for a reason, and that there was some kind of important event in her past that led to her being left on that planet. Like, I'm not sure how much she'd know in terms of the specifics, because she was such a small child when she was left behind. And it's also, like, difficult to say how much of it would be knowing and how much it would be, like, wishing or desperately wanting something to be the case. So, for example, she might want her parents to be, like, important, powerful people who love her and actually really care about her and want her to come back. But it might be that they are just horrible people who like left their child there for like ignoble reasons. But yeah, we will see. This next one's going to be very quick to answer. Jane, via email. How hyped are you guys for The Last Jedi? Kirsty, how hyped are you?
Too hyped.
I'm hyped by a magnitude of 10 squillion billion trillion.
Yeah, I wrote in my
that hyped.
I wrote in my show notes LMAO because I can't even express like I would like to say that my expectations are in check, but the truth is that I have never been hyped like this for a movie. Like,
yeah. Oh my god.
It actually concerns me a little bit because there's a lot of pressure on Rian Johnson.
Yeah, like I'm wondering what on earth I'm going to be like in the week running up to The Last Jedi coming out. Because at this stage, I really don't think we're going to have any of the main plot points spoiled before we go in.
Which is going to be really exciting.
It's going to be really exciting, but also really terrifying.
Yeah.
Because the stakes are so high. Because we've spent like 2 years like obsessing over this thing and theorizing wildly. And obviously, like, I'm trying not to get too attached to any of like my theories or wishes for the story or anything. Like, it's inevitable that is going to colour how I see the film. So if it's something completely different from what I'm expecting, that completely undermines how I perceive The Force Awakens and the characters in that film, and like the broad strokes of where I thought they might go. Like, so say that like Kylo just does become like an evil monster and there's no character depth and he just goes around like murdering people willy-nilly and doing like evil maniacal laughter wherever he goes, then I think that would crush me. To an extent.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I don't think that's going to happen for a moment, so
I think the most important thing to remember is that it's only the second part of a 3-part trilogy. So we have to prepare ourselves for the fact that there are probably going to be even more questions raised by it. It's not going to answer everything.
Yes.
So it's not the end of the fandom roller coaster.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's definitely going to rock like everyone's expectations to an extent. Like, no one is going to get everything right. So it's just going to be so interesting to see how, like, what the hell happens and how it's going to affect the fandom. Because, like, you almost want it to be like this seismic shift, like when Vader was revealed to be Luke's father. Obviously, it's not going to be that same kind of thing because that wouldn't be shocking. But, well, some people think that it is. Like, Rey, I am your father.
From Kylo, of course.
Oh, yes, of course. But yeah, it's going to be something that has people like talking manically about what's going on, because that's what they want, right? Like, they need it to generate controversy. Like, they want this to be a cultural moment. So
yeah,
yes, it's exciting.
Very, very exciting. Right, then we have Jerry from Ontario via email. Hello ladies, loving the intelligent conversation in your podcast. Thank you very much. Could you talk about the significance of the scene where Rey is standing on the edge of the lake near Mars's castle on Takodana? Seems like there's more to it than just Rey enjoying the view and fresh air. We know that this is the first time Rey has seen so much green in the galaxy, but do you believe there is any connection to the fact that Jakku used to be a lush planet? What is the significance of this moment in the context of Rey's character development and the overall story? Kirsty, what do you make of this one?
I'm not so sure about the connection with Jakku being like used to be a lush planet, which we kind of get from Aftermath, but that is an interesting idea. It's something that hadn't occurred to me, so I'll have to think about that a bit more. But I think there's supposed to be a contrast between Jakku and Takodana. Like that seems pretty clear to me from the symbolism. Like, you can see it as kind of a crossing the threshold moment, which Rey has a few of those, because obviously her getting onto the Falcon for the first time and leaving Jakku is a huge moment too.
Yes.
But yeah, like, they want to position this vibrant, lush landscape of Takodana in contrast with this lifeless stasis of Jakku that Rey wasn't able to escape for so long. Like, psychologically, she could have physically left any time, but she chose not to. So there's this idea that her life was going absolutely nowhere. She was looking at that old woman and kind of picturing herself in the future. And then all of a sudden, she's in this place that she never could have imagined. You know, it's so beautiful to her. And especially the forest on Takodana, like, forests are very common locations for fairy tales, and that kind of motif of, getting lost, like maidens getting lost and pursued by the wolf is obviously like this representation of moving into adulthood and coming to terms with your own sexuality and others around you. So I feel like Takodana is pretty heavy with those. Yeah,
I think Kirsty pretty much hit the nail on the head with her explanation there. I really do think it, in many ways, it's about like representing everything this girl could have had but never had, and it's meant to be like a very poignant moment. So it's like almost like an extension of the interaction with Han, where you can just see he's thinking, this poor girl, and like realizing how wretched her life's been and how much of this suffering is also self-imposed, because like he's shocked when like she doesn't jump at his offer. And you can tell that like he realizes that there's more going on with this girl. Like, why is she so fixated on like waiting like for her family? Like, because presumably if she's been there since she was small, then no one's going to come back for her.
Yeah.
And I think like he pities her, but he can't quite work her out. So she's a bit of a mystery to him.
Yeah, I've seen some people online say that when she says, "I've never seen so much green in the whole galaxy," or "I didn't know there was so much green," and Han looks at her with this kind of, quite sad look on his face.
Yeah.
I've seen some people like theorize that that's him connecting who she is, like he recognizes her all of a sudden, like and especially people who think that she could be his daughter.
Yeah.
But I think it's almost the opposite, because it's him realizing, like you say, how awful this girl's life has been, how little she's seen, and she has so much potential, as we see that unfolds through the movie. Like, she can do so much, she's so strong. She has so much compassion and loyalty and bravery. Like, Rey is just awesome. You just feel so sad that she wasted so much of her time waiting for her family. Like,
yeah.
I again, coming back to the idea of Rey's parents, like, I don't care to speculate on it too much, but I feel like I'm going to hate her parents,
Yeah.
I can't not, because of they caused her to lose so much time. Like,
yeah.
There's so much trauma there that hasn't really been explored yet. Like, in The Force Awakens, she's still quite repressed and like denying to herself what's really happened, that she's wasted so much time and never had these connections with people, and doesn't have a life. Like, The Force Awakens is about her finding that life and destiny. So that is empowering and great to see. But there is such a sadness that I think we're going to kind of see in The Last Jedi. Like, I think they're going to have to explore that with Rey more.
Yeah. I think, it will depend on the circumstances. Like, so I do think that it's going to be impossible to like her parents if they deliberately left her there, like, with the intention, like, of not coming back for her. Then that's awful. But I think they would if she were, like, kidnapped or taken away from her family, then, like, I'd probably feel more sympathy for all parties. But
yeah, people like Pablo have described it as abandonment. Again, it's like, that's not canon yet because it's not in the story, but if it is abandoned, there's just no justification for that. Like, that's something I can't forgive. I love Rey too much. So.
Yeah. No, like, it's like, why would you do that to your child?
Yeah.
Anywhere else. There must be space orphanages somewhere. Come on.
Rey. Oh, the opening montage of The Force Awakens, like, with her, it just breaks my heart. So.
Yeah, it is really sad. Like, all that like pointless hope.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Then we have our last question, and this is from Maria via email. Hey, Kirsty and Rachel, I have a question for you. At some point in The Force Awakens, Han explains the Force to Rey and says, "A magical power that holds together the light side and the dark. It's true, all of it." Is this foreshadowing? Do you think we're going to see the balance of the Force, aka Reylo? How do you imagine it? I really don't think that's about Reylo. I think it is like just what it seems to be, which is like Han defining the Force. Because like, I think it's easy to forget that for quite a few people, especially younger viewers, Force Awakens would probably have been the first Star Wars film they'd ever seen. So they will have needed like basic refresher introductions to the main concepts of Star Wars. So like the Force and like the Jedi and like the Sith.
Yeah.
And I think that's why that line is there. I don't think it's foreshadowing as such.
Yeah, I do think they are making efforts with the new stories in canon, like to emphasize the fact that the Force is both dark and light, because it felt like with the older canon that the dark side was kind of seen as this perversion and bastardization of the Force. Whereas now they're kind of emphasizing that the dark and light are integral parts of it. Like, they are both there, they are both valid and have merit. It's not like dark necessarily equals evil necessarily. Like, I know that they start out with that in Force Awakens, but I think there's going to be more to it.
Yes.
And you kind of get that with Rebels and other supplementary material too. Like, it's just not as simple as it first appears. So I think they're going to go somewhere interesting with this philosophy of the Force. But I agree with you. That line specifically just kind of seems to be Han bringing the audience up to speed by talking to Rey and Finn, because we have to remember Rey and Finn are completely unfamiliar with this. Like, Rey thought that Luke was a myth. Finn, as far as we know, does not have the Force. That might change with the future story, but like, the way he's depicted in The Force Awakens, it's very much like this is a new world to him, you know? And Rey too. So it's just kind of a device for Han he's kind of playing that Obi-Wan role in that, which is kind of ironic, really, isn't it? If you think about the way that is positioned in A New Hope.
Yeah. It's heavily ironic.
Yeah. So I don't think it's foreshadowing about the balance. I do think overall in The Force Awakens, there are lots of examples of other lines that kind of hint at where things might be going.
Yeah, sure. I just don't think that's one of them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for the questions, everyone. We hope you enjoyed us getting to them. So obviously, quite often we can't get to questions just because of how long the show runs for. And yeah, like last week we had a 5-hour show, and it's like I can't do questions now. I can't. Yeah, so I felt like we were just fine skipping them, but it was actually really fun to get to them this time. So yeah, if you have any questions for future, please send them to scavengershoard@gmail.com. And yeah, I think with that said, I think it's time to close the show. Where can people find you, Kirsty?
I'm Bastila Bay on Tumblr and Scavengers Hoard on Twitter.
And I'm Star Wars Nonsense on Tumblr and Journal of the Star Wars on WordPress. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and we hope you tune in next week for our Empire's End discussion and any of the news that will have come out. Pray that is more news than this week. Thanks, everyone, and podcast soon. Bye.
Bye.